Hello and welcome back to my channel The Bleach Fanfiction. Join us as we explore the world of fanfiction and fantasy and bring you the best story and discussions. This is the 9th part of What If Ichigo's time travel made him unstoppable. By Grimlock_Bragi.so. Give this video a like and subscribe for more videos in future, so let's get into the fanfic. As soon as I entered the classroom, I felt everyone's eyes on me. There seemed to be a pervading sense of intrigue and curiosity that I truly could care less about. With Yhwach happily swishing her tail while on my shoulder and Unohana possessing a silently satisfied smile behind me, I went over to my seat, slinging my backpack onto the back of my chair. Ichigo, thankfully learning quickly, entered my view before coming closer, an odd look on his face. Mizuiro and Tatsuki also joined in, the dark-haired boy fiddling with his phone once more and the karate student leaning on my desk. I regarded them all cluelessly as Ichigo and Tatsuki attempted to stare something out of me. "What?" I asked first. "What's up with you?" my childhood friend immediately demanded. "You went home with the new students on Wednesday. I hear something about them having already transferred out. You skipped Thursday and Friday, and now you come back after your extended weekend DMN near glowing." Snorting, I leaned back in my seat. I solved Rurikayo's problem, so they all returned to the Soul Society. As for why I'm happy, I found out I'm now rich, ate some microbans, and made plans to watch Kamen Rider. My hand came up to scratch Yhwach's chin, which she delighted in, purring against my fingers. Also, I got laid. Tatsuki slipped off my desk, failed to catch herself, and smacked her jaw against the wood on her way to the floor. Ichigo froze in place, his face turning a bright red as his own jaw dropped. Mizuiro's phone slipped from his fingers before he madly lunged down, luckily managing to catch it before it hit the ground. As I enjoyed the silence, I swiftly realized the silence extended to the entire room. A glance around confirmed that everyone inside, most especially an unfortunate Orihime that seemingly entered at the worst time, was staring at me. "Ah!" I breathed, completely uncaringly. I must have said that a bit too loud. My bad. There was absolute certainty in my mind that Yhwach was exercising every technique she knew to not collapse with laughter, and I still felt her body shaking with repressed hilarity. Some random student who I will never bother to remember the name of stuttered. "You mean, like, L laid out, right?" It appeared to be the unanimously agreed upon belief that it was impossible for me to be sexually active. Then again, I displayed pretty aggressively in the past how much I opposed perverts. Rather impressive that everyone found it more believable that the Ichigo Kurosaki they were certain could hold his own against the Yakuza would lose a fight over having section. Nah. I tore apart that belief viciously. There was the sound of Orihime fainting and falling to the ground. Well, it was better for her to learn sooner rather than later. With who? Another student that would forever remain nameless in my mind shouted. "Ichem." As the son of a doctor, I was well aware of how frowned upon doctor-patient relationships were, so I couldn't mention Unohana. And none of the students were aware of Yhwach's human form, so that could only end catastrophically. Wait. A devilish thought came to me, and a smile befitting the thought curled onto my face. Someone I met while invading some old gang's territory. My nurse had to cover her mouth to smother her giggle. There was no way the populace of Karakura High wouldn't believe such an idea. Ichigo choked on his spit. It appeared he made the connection first out of all my friends. That actually kinda makes sense. He's the only one to whom I hinted the idea that Unohana was comparable to a Yakuza member. Also, I was fairly certain that if class didn't start soon to shift us off topic, Yhwach was gonna explode from suppressing her laughter. "What's got all of you so freaked out? Class is about to start, quiet down." Ms. Oki came in as if she was summoned by my thoughts, and I leaned back in my seat while stroking Yhwach's fur. "Was it really necessary to get Unohana to drag Kisuke out of the shop before you came?" Yhwach asked as she stretched, the two of us currently in Kisuke's basement. You're kinda going a bit overboard with teasing him about the fact that he's in the dark about something. It's not that. I shook my head, my breath escaping me in such a way that I didn't think I would be able to SCK it all back in for a while. I get it, and it's why Zangetsu and I keep drilling it into everyone's heads, but when we say that Kisuke and I were the only ones left at the end, everyone focuses on the fact that so many died. No one really catches on to the other part of it, which is that Kisuke was all that I had left to hold on to. Yoruchi flinched violently, as the realization hit her. That Kisuke was the only other one that could understand. He had been there from the start, made it all the way to the end, and was there to witness every single crack and dent Yhwach hammered into me as it happened. He was almost as vital in the war efforts as I was, more so in many cases. He wasn't a front-liner, he's not built for that, but I'm certain he got as much rest as I did, if not less. He pushed himself as strong as I did, if not more, in different ways. He pulled me out of so many downward spirals I'm not even sure he was able to keep track. I pulled him out of his labs and forced him into a bed so many times there's no point in counting. When you died, I had to pause as the memory flickered behind my eyes for a second. Kisuke was the only other one that was hit as strong as I had been. Soifan probably would have been as well, but she had been dead for a while by then. Kisuke was there for me when Unohana died as much as I was there for him when the shop got decimated with Tessai and the kids inside. Kisuke bore witness to all the ways my friends' deaths tore me apart just as I saw his steady breakdown as every invention and plan he painstakingly made failed. When I traveled back in time, seeing everybody was like getting them back again. But it feels like if I see Kisuke again, it'll be like throwing away the one I know. I'll see him, I just need more time. Yoruchi came close and pulled me down in a hug, which I returned as I rested my chin on her shoulder. Do you want to leave this for another day? She whispered in my ear. No, doing something productive will make me feel better. I mumbled, before forcing a grin on my face. And we both know you're just stalling because you know what your training is without me having to tell you. I felt her slouch against me. I hate that form. She whined. A chuckle left me as I unwove my arms from her and stood straight. She repositioned her hands so they were on her hips. It's disgusting. It's powerful. I mentioned. It's inherently uncontrollable. Very, very true. There really was no way to argue that. The form reduced her to nothing but impulsive instincts and desires. Even low-level hollows usually had a level of sentience that superseded that. We did figure out a trick to direct you, though. She seemingly couldn't help but raise an eyebrow in disbelief. Okay, I know you wouldn't just lie to my face like that, but what the hell could you come up with to make that form manageable that even Kisuke couldn't figure out? Kisuke's flaw with figuring stuff like that out is that he doesn't really have a proper understanding of feral instincts. He can tell you what they are on a chemical level, but past that he draws a blank. Instincts don't really follow a logical pattern, so he can figure out easy stuff like eat, sleep, and breed, but the nuances of it are more or less forever lost to him. It was at that where her eyes began to soften in understanding. And you've got a much clearer awareness of that stuff because you're part hollow. Right. So, in your Kakubyo Senki form, you basically enter a state of being incredibly impulsive. As soon as something new comes to mind, you abandon everything before that and focus on that new thing. That's what Kisuke told me, yeah. The thing is, while that high impulse thing isn't really gonna be something we can do anything about, we can manipulate it thanks to you being in a state where your instincts are also turned up to 11. The first priority for anything is self-survival, but the one after that is the survival of things you deem important. That makes sense, but I'm not really figuring out what you're getting at. I'm getting there, don't worry. I assured. What we figured out is that your instincts will more or less direct how your impulses go. If your instincts are telling you that you need to survive, your impulses will streamline into attacking and dodging. When you're in that state, you actually adopt a fighting style that's similarly as dangerous as mine, in that experienced fighters are so vigilant of other experienced fighters that going off pure feral instinct completely catches them off guard. If I'm buying what you're selling, then you figured out a way to keep me in a state of fight or flight while in that form. Or something very close to it, at least. I confirmed. Alright, what's this method then? Speaking from experience, you are never going to like it. I don't even like the idea of using this form, just shut up and tell me. The workcat snapped. Like I said, after self-survival, your highest instinctual priority is the safety of those you care about. So if we can trick you into thinking something you care about is in danger, you'll enter full fight mode. Furthermore, if we get you to think something specifically is endangering something you care about, you practically maul whoever it happens to be. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you implying what I think you're implying? The way we managed to direct you in Kakubyo Senki was by throwing vials filled with the BLD of either Unohana, Soifan, Kisuke, or myself onto the enemy. Usually, it was Soifan's followed by Kisuke since Unohana and I were always in a fight, but Unohana's and mine were usually more effective at getting you to really go off on an enemy. Never mind, it's worse. It was generally agreed that the trade-off was worth it. Honestly, Kenpachi was still more feral than you on your worst days, so Kairaku didn't even see it as that bad. Kenpachi was guaranteed to consistently attack the enemy. That form is not. It's not like we had you go into that form often. Over the course of the full 7 years, I think it was only around 10 times. That is 10 times more than I'd like to use that form. Feral strength is nowhere near as effective as precise blows. That's true, but feral instincts are leaps and bounds harder to predict than trained skills, and remember, the Quincy have files on how you fight. Add on the power boost you receive, and Kisuke and Kuratsuchi both calculated that you're overall more effective in that form than out of it. There's no way it's that necessary for me to use that form to win the fight against the Quincy. I really couldn't stop the incredulous raise of my eyebrow. Are you really defaulting to the argument Yamamoto and Unohana both tried on me? You know, the two remaining original captains that were said to be part of the strongest generation of the Gotei 13, who each have redefined the Shinigami's perception of strength as a whole. F.U. How about this, we'll compromise. You and I, with absolute privacy since I turned off the cameras before we went down here, will train with your Kakubyo Senki form. When it comes time to fight the Quincy, we'll keep a vial of my BLD on you, and I will fully trust in your ability to determine whether or not it's absolutely vital for you to use that form. That doesn't sound like much of a compromise. It does when Kisuke has an invention that can force you to transform. Her eyes shot open, indignation filling her golden orbs. That piece of sheet. So, compromise? I pleaded. She huffed and crossed her arms under her chest. You turned off all the cameras. I'm not Kisuke. You said it yourself, I wouldn't lie to you. The workcat remained contemplative for a few long moments, before she bared her teeth and hissed distastefully. Fine. Tatsuki couldn't help the twitch in her eye as she looked upon the shop before her. I've never seen a shadier-looking building in my life. She lowered her eyes to confirm the address that had been texted to her, unfortunately discovering that she was indeed in the right place. With a defeated sigh, she slid open the front door and stepped inside. A dark-skinned man in an apron paused in his stocking of one of the shelves and focused on the karate girl. Good evening, miss, are you looking for something? He politely asked. Tatsuki readjusted her bag on her shoulder. Yeah, Ichigo told me that if he's not at home, then this place is the best way for me to find him. I wanted to go over some homework with him. I see, you're a friend of his. The man paused for a moment. He's currently busy with something downstairs, I'll let him know you came by. You don't have to pretend around me, he gave me the full story. He said that as long as he's not going out to kill someone, he's free to talk, so where is he? She huffed. I see. The dark-haired girl thought the man blinked, but she wasn't certain considering his glasses practically absorbed all light and prevented her from seeing his eyes. "You may, follow me, then." He gently placed down the box he had been holding and began walking towards the back of the store, the girl mostly patiently trailing behind him. He led her around more hallways than she felt fit inside a building the size she had estimated upon looking at it, before he stepped aside. She glanced at the only thing found inside the room he had directed her towards, being a square hole in the ground with a ladder leading down. "Kurosaki-san and Unohana Taicho are down there," he explained. Tatsuki glanced down at the ladder, and shrugged, shouldering her bag and starting the climb down. As she lowered herself down, she took notice of the room she was climbing down into, which had a painted ceiling and walls to mimic a sunny sky with the occasional cloud. The floor was simple rock, replicating a rocky canyon or mountain range with concerning accuracy. To her pleasant surprise, there even seemed to be a hot spring hidden amongst the rocks, the stone around it high enough to provide decent coverage. She hummed in approval as she went down the rungs, noting in the back of her mind that the ladder was very tall, and further noting how large the room appeared to be. The girl wondered how the room didn't collapse without any support pillars. Almost 2 full minutes later, she skipped the last couple rungs to drop to the ground. Glancing around, she couldn't find anything that indicated where Ichigo or his nurse were, so she decided to simply start to wander in hopes of finding them. Ichigo had mentioned something about recognizing her soul or whatever, so she felt confident that if she truly got lost, she could just shout and wait for him to come to her. Then, amidst her wandering, she began to hear noises. The first and most notable noises she heard were both feminine and masculine grunting. Rough, throaty, and aggressive, from both ends. The second that came to her awareness were the distinct sounds of flesh meeting flesh. Powerful, unforgiving, and fast, with seemingly no rhythm to it. The third was the wetness. The distinct sound of something wet colliding with something equally as soaked. Droplets being flung into the ground aggressively. A cold pit began to form in Tatsuki's stomach as disgust and horror seeped into her mind. Unfortunately, she could not keep herself from recalling Ichigo's words from the previous day, the words that had stunned the entire school of Karakura High. Despite the awareness of what she was most likely to find, she was incapable of keeping her feet from cautiously stepping towards the sounds. As she came closer to the source, more sounds joined the others, and absolutely none of them helped the image in her mind. The ripping of clothing, the shuffling of something moving along the ground, the smacks of bodies being slammed against stone. Her body prepared to expunge the contents of her stomach in anxiety of what she was about to witness, before she peered around the outcropping of rock blocking her from the source. "What the F are you two doing?" She couldn't help but scream in genuine terror as she sprinted towards the sight of Ichigo and Unohana in panic. Both Shinigami blinked in surprise at the unexpected shout, before turning their heads towards the oncoming karate girl. "Sparring?" the orange-haired man asked, seemingly lost as to why the dark-haired girl was so horrified. "There's a knife in your FI. What kind of sparring involves that?" True to the high schooler's word, there was a foot-long blade that was impaled in the man's right eye. When he had opened his mouth to speak, there had been a glint of metal within that most likely was the point of the knife embedded within his skull. There was additionally a second blade of the same make sticking out from just below the left side of his collarbone. A third was lodged in his right side, penetrating through his ribs to undoubtedly pierce his lung. A fourth was also found on the right side of his body, directly above where his NPL ought to be. Many bruises and cuts of varying sizes were upon his face, and several slices were scattered around his chest and arms, BLD trailing from every open wound. The time traveler currently was also straddling the torso of Unohana, who was on the ground. His right hand had loosened his grip, but remained upon the throat of his apparent sparring partner. The orange-haired protector's left was pulled back in a fist, though his hand had turned black up until around halfway up his forearm. His counterpart, the proclaimed nurse, was soaked in nearly as much BLD as Ichigo. She was dressed in as many bruises and cuts as him, though rather than slices from the mysterious knives, she looked as though she had been clawed at by something with the ferocity and strength of a bear. The blue-eyed woman, surprisingly, also could claim to being impaled, a fifth knife stuck through her collarbone. The source of the collection of knives was also seemingly apparent, as a sixth blade was clasped in the woman's left hand, in position to stab into the brown-eyed man above her. Her right hand had a firm grip on Ichigo's top, to keep him in place. Sparring where we agreed to not use our Zanpakuto, of course. Unohana was the one to answer, both Shinigami seemingly content to remain in their position. I see 6 knives between the two of you. Yeah, and? Ichigo questioned dumbly. These are just normal knives Unohana keeps in her sleeves. The only thing we banned were our Zanpakuto. Everything else is fair game. The sapphire-eyed medic had her eyes scrunched in confusion, as though she felt her sparring partner's words made perfect sense. If we did not wish for any weapons to be used, we would have made that the rule. She supported. What the F is wrong with you two? Well, I already told you what's up with me. Unohana's just like this. To the brown-eyed girl's increasing horror, the nurse did nothing more than nod in agreement. Actually, the boy amended, to an extent, I am also just like this. We like fighting. The karate girl sputtered in a moment before rage finally managed to wade through the shock. She stomped forth and grabbed the hybrid by the back of his top, mostly only succeeding in pulling him up thanks to the other two permitting the action. You have 2 F knives in the same lung, that is not fighting, that is, trying to kill each other. Ichigo then decided to do what was apparently his thing now, which was to flip her perception so violently on its head that she lost any semblance of an ability to respond. I have high-speed regeneration, and she was trained by the guy that invented all forms of healing that Shinigami use. Getting impaled by a knife or two for us is the same as getting a bruise. Though, his face turned pouty as he shifted his gaze to Unohana, I know I told you how annoying it is for me to have internal bleeding. I was curious to see why you find it so annoying. You could have just asked. The man groused as he stepped a few feet away from the woman and the girl. As he did so, he grasped the blades sticking out from his lung and ripped them out without a moment's hesitation. Before Tatsuki's eyes, she watched the gaping wounds visibly seal themselves shut, though it was far from instantaneous. In no more than a minute or two, she was certain, there would be no indication that he had ever been impaled. Save for the nauseating amounts of BLD. Being told why you find it so annoying isn't as informative as witnessing the reason in action. As a medical professional, it's good to dash. Even the braided woman paused as the BLD-soaked man braced his hands on his knees and vomited what had to be a liter of BLD onto the ground. Once he was done, the honey-eyed man stood back up straight and wiped his mouth with his right sleeve. The body is obviously not made to have BLD in places that aren't supposed to have BLD, so the only way for me to get it out is to either vomit or PSS it out. He sent a glare towards the captain. I'm sure you aren't unaware of how much it burns to vomit or PSS BLD. Was what he finished with before removing the blade in his eye. Thankfully for Tatsuki's stomach, he covered the damaged eye with his hand as it healed. The karate girl didn't want to find out what it looked like when an eye fixed itself. A shuffling of feet brought her to automatically turn her head towards Unohana, who was rising to her feet. The woman was giving the blade in her collarbone as much attention as her childhood friend had been, mostly poking at her ripped clothing with a pout on her face. I told you we should have stripped for this spar. She complained like it was a perfectly normal thing to say. If we keep damaging my robes like this, Yamamoto Soteicho is going to start taking it out of my pay. And like I told you, I would have been fine with that, except I don't trust Kisuke to not record and sell footage of you naked. Tatsuki's eyes bulged out of her skull at the words. He didn't seem like the sort to do those things when he was a captain, as brief as that was. Well, obviously. He had the pay of a captain, and he was the head of the R&D. He could get any resources he needed. He has neither had access to Soul Society's resources nor funds for the past 100 years. If the man wants to experiment, he needs some way to get those resources, and trust me, he's willing to sell other people's NDE pictures. A long moment of silence followed. Did he dash? The brown-eyed girl questioned. Yes. The orange-haired man's voice was understandably tight. The women of the Soul Society hounded me for a goddamn year after that. They only stopped after I stormed Las Noches and ended the Winter War. Unohana tilted her head. I feel as though an achievement as great as ending a war would only further their interest, no. After the fight with Aizen, I needed extensive healing. From what I was told, you and Orihime worked together for almost 40 hours to get me stable. The mature woman nodded as if that explained everything. Also the Quincy declared war like 3 hours after that. He tacked on. I'm sorry, is shit like this just normal for you? The karate girl finally snapped. The Shinigami turned to her. Are you just now realizing this? Ichigo asked. Well, sorry if it takes some time to get used to you going from a teenage jackass who thought he was too cool to smile to time-traveling war-torn ghost badass in the blink of an eye. Ah, you think I'm badass? The man smiled widely. Her fist slammed into his gut. She was the one that doubled over, cradling her injury. His laughter filled the air. Shut up. That only heightened his amusement. Ichigo, are you going to release your black armor? The captain wondered. Oh, you mean my acero? He held up his hand for clarification. Before their eyes, the black covering his hand receded into his fingertips before disappearing completely. It's like Hierro level. No one's told me of a proper name for it, so I made it up myself. And what does it mean? Well, Hierro means iron, and I know steel is stronger than iron, so I just looked up Spanish for steel. That's more effort than you've put into naming anything else, so progress. Tatsuki muttered. Unohana giggled behind her hand. When we were kids one day, we were talking about what pets we wanted to have, and he wanted to name a dog Inu. How lazy is that? The time traveler rolled his eyes. Yeah, my being sheet with names is nothing new. But why you're down here is. He raised an eyebrow meaningfully. Which in turn caused her to remember why she had ventured here. I wanted your input on the homework we got. She explained. The girl looked up at him as she said this, and witnessed the complete transition from passivity, to confusion, to dread. I didn't catch what was assigned as homework. What do you mean, you didn't catch what was assigned? You were staring straight at the board the whole day. I was thinking about training people. Was his defense. For 6 hours. You do not understand how complicated training can get when you involve Zanpakuto. And Quincy powers. And full bring. I literally cannot train 2 people in the same way. Have you not been training Yamamoto Sateicho and Kenpachi Taicho in the same way? Training Kenpachi was helping him realize that he shouldn't hold himself back out of fear of being too much to handle. What we're doing now is getting his body to catch up to where his head's at. Training Yamamoto is the spiritual equivalent of undoing atrophy. Unohana nodded in acquiescence. Doesn't matter. You're the only one I have the contact info for in my 5th PRD. How am I supposed to check my answers if you don't even know what the homework is? After a moment of thought, Ichigo's expression slowly narrowed. Yuryu is also in our 5th PRD. He sounded oddly disgusted as he spoke the words. And you have his number. Tatsuki grinned. Why do you sound so sad, though? I was gonna try to take advantage of being from the future to get higher grades than Yuryu. Going to him to ask what the homework was might tip him off, which would get him to study more. Are you serious? She deadpanned. He'll never admit it out loud, but he's been aware since day one that he would never be able to beat me in a fight. To balance that out, he's always lorded his better grades over me. I will beat him one of these days. Does it even count if you're literally using knowledge from the future? To the shock of both the woman and the girl, Ichigo merely waved that off. Yuryu has and always will be smarter than me. I happen to currently know more shit regarding spiritual affairs, but that doesn't change the fact that he will always be better at using his head. I want to get higher grades than him once just so I can see the look on his face. You know what, fair. How about you give me his number and I tell him that I had to get it from you, 'cause you didn't bother to pay attention in class. Deal. By the way, if this all goes well and you stop the war, what are you gonna do after you graduate? Never really had the downtime to give it much thought. Probably just gonna die, to be honest. What dash? I already have a job in the Soul Society, I'll probably just kill my human body and live there. I'll visit on weekends. Oh yeah, you mentioned that last week. What was it again? War Preparation Leader. When I put my authority into practice, I basically can order around the entirety of the Godai 13. Holy shit. What's funny is that last time, I ended a war and was basically the most essential fighter during both wars, but they never let me be anything higher than what basically amounted to a paid intern. All three of them laughed at that. Water crashing into me and soaking me to the bone snapped me out of my daze. The scalding heat of it was familiar, in a way that had me gripping my Zanpakuto harder and gnashing my teeth. My head whipped around to see Tenjiro, like I worried, but not with the gray skin that indicated the zombification of a powerful Shinigami. He had an uncomfortably straight face, his own Zanpakuto resting on his right shoulder. His eyes were focused, unmoving from me. Tenjiro, what the F are you dash? Fight's over, kid. The healer's voice was grave, and hit me as strong as the geyser of water had. I cast my gaze around, seeing bodies strewn all around the remains of the Rukon district we had been in. BLD stained the ground, rubble was everywhere, same with the corpses of the Rukon residents. Nothing was moving. I blinked. Come on. The Zero Squad member urged. Nodding my head was more of an automatic response rather than a conscious one as I sheathed Zangetsu and stepped over to the waiting carriage. Despite being over 2 years since the last time it happened, I couldn't stop myself from waiting for a second for Chad to pull me up inside. Like every other time, the reminder that Chad wasn't here anymore to do that caused me to flinch, before I hauled myself in silently and sat in my seat. It felt cold without Unohana to lean over and rest her head on my shoulder. It felt unsecure without Dad and Kenpachi to sit closest to the back, each with a leg across like they were guarding the way in. It felt uneven and unsteady without Chad to sit across from me, silently fingering his coin. A pulse of warmth from Zangetsu pulled me closer to the present. I adjusted in my seat to get comfortable, despite knowing I wouldn't be without the rest of the frontliners, and stared out the back of the carriage as I was scooted back to the Shiba house. It, more specifically the cannon built inside of it, was the only way to get to the royal palace, and thusly was what the Wandenrake wanted to take control of more than anything. After Ichigo put up the kind of bullshit protection spells only he could make, what remained of the Godai 13 made it our home base. It took far too long, anything later than the day the Quincy had declared war seemed like too long to me, though, but Ichigo had eventually assigned Tenjiro and Kiryu as exclusively support roles for the Godai. Tenjiro used his healing prowess to heal anyone that didn't have high-speed regeneration, and Kiryu provided everyone with Ryatsu-rich foods, with Ichigo regularly sending down care packages full of the stuff Kiryu needed to keep the food coming. The ride stopping abruptly drew me into the present, and I refocused to see we were next to the Shiba house. Looked like we were somewhere around the mid-20s of the Rukon today. It helped a lot to not get overwhelmed by the Quincy's that the house was built to move around. I stepped out before Tenjiro could get all pissy about wasting his time and entered the building. There was a bit less hustle and bustle, luckily there didn't seem to be less bodies than usual. The doors to what we turned into the meeting room were shut, meaning the captains were discussing something. I peeked into one of the infirmaries, and thankfully it was mostly empty. With those out the way, I went forth with completing my usual route, going straight to the lab. Kisuke had all but demanded that the lab be as close as possible to the cannon in case of emergencies, so I had to walk past the launch pad to reach the door. As soon as I opened the door, I heard arguing. Weaving around the various projects, I eventually caught sight of Kiryu, in her thin form, yelling at Kisuke, who was sitting at a computer. He was typing in the way I had come to recognize as him being too tired to think. "You're our head researcher, we have to rely on your inventions to beat the Quincy's, meaning you have to be at the top of your game to do it." The pink-haired woman yelled. "You're barely keeping yourself upright, let alone coherent, nothing good will come out of your head like this. You'll just end up creating something likely to fail before it even reaches the battlefield. So it'll be just as successful as anything else I've made." The blonde snarled. "Every moment I don't spend trying to outsmart them is the getting another step ahead of us. We've been on the back foot since this war started, we have to turn that around, and that's not going to happen if we slack off." "It's not slacking off, it's getting yourself refreshed. Getting your mind back to working at its best, thinking things through rather than attempting something doomed to fail at its inception." "Everything I've done has failed, Hikifune," he barked back. The death-dealing, adapted to everything I threw at him, Hyasub was the one that put up wards so our throats aren't slit in our sleep. My plan to use the distortion energy to reach the palace only ended up being an opening for the shut whatever to sneak in behind us. They've designated you a special war threat for a reason, Kisuke. They don't know how you think, they can't prepare for you, the only reason you've failed so far is because their only way to outsmart you is by keeping you too exhausted to think. You're only feeding into their plans like this. At the very least, as long as they know I'm working to defeat them, they're also constantly having to make up new plans. My continuous efforts are keeping their nerves on edge as much as they're messing with mine." Kisuke finally turned to face the fellow scientist as his voice raised at the end. In doing so, he spotted me. "Ichigo, you understand, help me convince her. You used to be in the Onmitsukido and you just noticed him." Kiryu immediately tried to reason. I started stepping forward. "You're right, I do understand." I hummed, before I reached out, grabbed the back of his coat, and lifted him into the air to look him in the eye. "I understand that not getting rest will make anyone worse off, and that, against the Wandenrake, anyone not on their A-game will end up in the ground." He tried to look away. I grabbed his chin and forced him to look into my eyes. "I can't lose you too." When I let go of his face, he couldn't do anything but remain staring at me, the bags under his eyes seeming to grow heavier with each passing second. "I couldn't stop you even if I wanted to, so there's no point in resisting." He sighed quietly. I glanced at Kiryu. "We'll eat properly after a nap. You have anything we can finish quickly?" The woman's face was a mixture of pleased and concerned, but she reached back and lifted a plate from where it had been sitting next to Kisuke's computer. There were rice balls on it. I picked one up and held it out to the blonde, who stared at it for a long second before he grasped it and took a small bite. The first one I grabbed for myself was practically swallowed whole, which I balanced out by biting into the second one and chewing as I hung Kisuke off my shoulder and started walking to the launch pad. There was a futon to the side of the launch pad. At first, there had been a lot more. Kisuke and Kuratsuchi had delivered quite a convincing argument for why the 12th Division needed to have the quickest access to an escape route. At Kairaku's order, the frontliners also bunked at the launch pad, to guarantee that no one could successfully perform a raid for the cannon. Honestly, I didn't remember when it started, but sometime after I became the only frontliner, Kisuke and I began sharing his futon. Neither of us had any longing to verbalize why. I lowered the blonde down so that he was sitting on the futon with his back against the raised platform of the launch pad, and I sat to his right. He was about 2/3 of the way through his rice ball by this point, with me having finished mine by the time we were out of the lab. The two of us sat in silence, staring at what used to be. There was a minor shifting next to me, and Kisuke's head rested on my shoulder. My arm came around to rest atop his shoulders as I lowered my head to lay on his. "Night, Frankenstein." I muttered, a routine I couldn't recall when we started. "Aizen was the one that put you together." He hummed back, the fog of drowsiness entering him just as it did me. "But you're the one that got me working." I finished, feeling his body go slack as soon as the words left me. Once he was out, I wasn't far behind. I couldn't help but chew on my lip as I stood in front of the door of the Urahara Shoten. My right foot tapped anxiously, and I didn't bother to try to control it. Kisuke was sitting in the shop, waiting for me to open the door. I didn't need to have a subconscious track of his Ryatsu to know that. He was happy to wait as long as necessary to have the dramatic entrance. As soon as I opened the door, he would flip out his fan, and lazily drawl about how great it was that I caught him at a time he wasn't busy. Not even bothering to pretend I wasn't stalling, I shifted my focus towards the updates given to me by Zangetsu. Shiro was making great progress with Momo, and he was keeping tabs on the fodder. He described them as slightly less pathetic, which meant they were doing great. Asen was helping Byakuya with apparently starting a goddamn mutiny, which I supported absolutely. He mentioned the two of them had gone to Kairaku a couple days ago to hint at what they were planning, and he hadn't been disapproving. Meaning that he was likely at the level of, if they order him to stop it, he will half-butt it. We want him at least at the level of, if they order him to stop it, he'll bullshit something about not receiving any orders. My palm rested on the frame of the sliding paper door, and I gently rested my forehead on my knuckles. Nearly everyone else I had reconnected with was different than the version of themselves I was familiar with. Beyond any obvious physical differences, like Rukia having 2 legs again or Yuryu having both arms. They were happier than what I was used to, less burdened even with all the training and preparations for war. It was easy for me to understand that no one could properly visualize everyone, including themselves, dying in war. Could they imagine the idea? Of course, but they couldn't feel the weight of it. Thus, everyone was lighter than I was used to. To such an extent that it was easy to separate them in my mind. The Rukia who had lived with 1 leg for the last 6 years of her life was a different person than the Rukia who still thought her Zanpakuto created ice. The Chad who had to be pulled away from beating the corpse of a Sternritter we could no longer identify was a different person than the Chad who had yet to even awaken his left arm. It was easier to be around them with that in mind. But Kisuke was different. Throughout the wars, he had never broken down, in that sense. He hadn't become a different person, rather I just saw more of what he always kept hidden away. He had always been paranoid, preparing for everything he could think of and then some. He had always been afraid of real failure, of loss and consequences. An invention not working as intended during testing was informative, it led to new ideas, different routes, and streamlining. A device he had trusted to protect someone failing only resulted in death. He wasn't like Renji, who had started off as someone who would be offended if you didn't think his tattoos were cool and died as someone who would flay himself alive if it meant Rukia's safety. The only difference between the Kisuke of this time and the one from mine was that mine was too tired to crack jokes. I both so desperately wanted to see him, and felt a pit form in my stomach at the very idea. Because with everyone else, it was so easy to view them like different people. Because with everyone else, it was so easy to forget they weren't the people I knew. Everyone else could look at the versions of themselves I knew and be horrified by what they became. Kisuke would just sigh and make some half-hearted joke about how the stitches on his face ruined his unassuming image. "Why are you just leaning against the door?" I blinked, surprised to hear anyone, and tilted my head to see Jinta standing with an annoyed look on his face. "Either go inside or leave, stop being weird." A breath escaped me, and I returned to how I was before I knew he was there. "Just shut up and leave me alone. You wouldn't get it. I never asked why you're being such a weirdo." He immediately shouted. "Mr. Urahara told me to sweep up the front of the store, and I can't do that if you're blocking the front door." I couldn't help the snort that left me. Since when do you actually do your chores instead of pawning them off onto Yururu? How do you know about that? Everyone knows about it. The kid huffed angrily, no doubt trying to figure out who ratted him out, despite that his method of hiding it was simply waiting until he thought no one was watching. It's all your fault, anyway. Mr. Urahara started being all uptight since you and Ms. Yoruchi came back from Soul Society. The confirmation drew a laugh from me. Good to know my strong work paid off. If he's making sure you actually do your chores, then you're finally learning some responsibility. Shut up. I'm responsible. And you're still not moving. The breath that left me was much more frustrated. I'm thinking, kid. Buzz off, it's not like you're not gonna get another opportunity to sweep the front of the store. You can think about stuff somewhere else, can't you? He snapped. Mr. Urahara said that the faster I sweep up the front of the store, the faster I can practice baseball, so move it. I've gotta do my thinking right here so that I don't have the chance to back out. I can't afford to go back and forth on this, so I need to make sure I actually do it. Now you're not even making sense. You're talking like you know you have to go inside, so just open the door and go. I've been trying to tell you, you brat, it's not that easy. I need to figure out if I'm ready to throw my old life away. You've never dealt with stuff like this, so I know you wouldn't understand. He scoffed. You threw away your old life as soon as you chose to come over here. My eyes snapped wide. It's way too late to back out, so just accept it and move. My head lifted as I turned to the redhead, who had his arms crossed over his chest. I was aware that my jaw was hanging, but I couldn't get myself to focus on that. Did Yoruchi talk to you? What would Ms. Yoruchi have anything to do with you being in the way of me doing my chores? I was left staring in astonishment that the boy had somehow said the exact thing I needed to hear without having any clue what he was talking about. Thanks, kid. You really have no idea how much that helped. I muttered as my fingers wrapped around the frame of the door. I pulled it open before I could even begin to backtrack. Do you never check the expiration dates on your sheet? I huffed as I parsed through a box of product, pulling nearly every third item out and tossing it into the trash bag beside me. I had the twins take care of that up until the winter war started. Kisuke muttered, he and Tessai hunched over a bench on the other side of the room. Kisuke was analyzing several samples that had been taken from me, while his partner was alternating between studying a book on forbidden Kido and the biology of how Ryatsu functioned. It was left unspoken that Yururu and Jinta were too busy to do tasks around the shop, currently in charge of keeping the hollows in Karakura at bay as they were. You still get human customers, you know, the ones that get most affected by expired food? Was my deadpan response. The blonde waved off the complaint. Outside of your spiritually aware friends, I only get human customers once a week or so. It's not like my product is that far past the expiration dates. This one is from 2 years ago. I held up. Tessai was the one to turn and glare at the rice cake in my hand. I knew he had been slacking off recently. The dark-skinned man grumbled before returning to his studying. A snort came from me as I finished the box and moved on to the next. The sound of the door sliding open caused my eyebrow to twitch. Oi, I don't care how boring you find patrols, if I find out someone gets hurt because you're lazy, I'm gonna dash. I blinked in confusion at finding the one that had opened the door was not the red-headed mod soul. It wasn't anyone at all, in fact, if you weren't aware spirits existed. Off to the side, Kisuke paused for just a moment. To what do I owe the pleasure, Kuchiki Taicho? I hummed in appreciation at the scientist keeping me from being in the dark. It's not often you come to my shop all by your lonesome. Trying my best to squash down all the feelings that suddenly burned inside of me, I turned back to the box of granola bars and returned to checking dates. Tessai and I feel like we are making good progress on returning Kurosaki-san to the fight. See, we've realized the issue is that his Ryatsu veins are actually dash. I was surprised that Kisuke appeared like he had been cut off mid-sentence. Byakuya must have been frustrated about something, if he didn't let the gray-eyed man finish speaking. Kisuke didn't seem to appreciate it, considering the man straightened and glared in the direction of the open door. Of course I have other ideas for stopping Aizen, but I fail to see why I should not prioritize getting our dear Kurosaki-san back on the field. There was a firm warning in his tone that caused the hairs on the back of my head to stand up straight. Whatever Byakuya said in response did nothing but get Tensai to do the same as his oldest friend, the two glaring at the clan head. Kurosaki-san has been involved in this war since before it started. Outside of the Hogyoku, he was Aizen's primary focus. There is no more foolish action than to disregard him simply because he is human. Wait, was Byakuya trying to throw me off to the side because I didn't have my powers? Rage built within me. I had come the closest to killing the megalomaniac. I was the only one that wasn't under the influence of Kyoka Suigetsu. He was threatening my town, my friends, my family. I had more reason to fight than nearly anyone in the Godai 13. Kuchiki Taicho, this is war. This is life or death. This is the time where rules do not matter, only victory. Your sense of duty demands that you do not permit humans to fight your battles. Fine. Then think of it like this, it is highly likely at this point that none of us are capable of killing Aizen, Yamamoto Suteicho included. Kurosaki-san may very well could if we return his powers to him. Are you going to allow your sense of duty to get in the way of performing that very duty? Even without the ability to perceive Ryatsu, I could feel the pressure in the air, the heavy threat of Kisuke's willingness to do anything as long as it would ensure victory. The unspoken warning that may very well include the killing of a noble clan head if he wished to prevent the ex-assassin from doing what he believes is necessary. As I said, of course I'm not dedicating all my resources to Kurosaki-san's recovery. I have never been one to put all my eggs in one basket. But by my calculations, he is our best bet. Silence filled the room, before the door shut on its own. He's gone, Kurosaki-san. Tensai was the one to inform me, before they both returned to their work. Thanks, you too. Gray eyes flicked to me for a moment before snapping back to the monitor in front of him. I wouldn't say what we're doing is deserving of thanks, but you're welcome nonetheless. Don't try that morality-deficient scientist shtick on me, Getabushi. We both know part of why you're doing this is because I can't stand to not be able to protect the people I care about. Well, that and the reliable free LBR. His smirk was heard in his tone. I threw a granola bar at his head. Kurosaki-san. What perfect timing you have. You caught me at a time when I wasn't overwhelmed with work. He drawled while covering his mouth with his fan. The sight brought a reminiscent smile to my face and a warm feeling to manifest in my chest. Long time, no see, Getabushi. His head twitched back as his eyes blinked under the shade of his hat. He tilted his head suspiciously, and I knew he was poking around with his Ryatsu sense to find anything that would indicate any true intentions. Unless you've somehow successfully tricked me since we've met, I'm certain you would have tried to hit me as soon as you saw my face again. My smile turned somewhere between malicious and teasing as I crossed my arms over my chest. And what reason would I have to hit you, huh? A light sweat appeared on his face. Go on, don't be shy. Clearly, you have an idea on what it could be, or else you wouldn't bring it up. Oh, he laughed off, Yoruchi-chan told me a little bit. I can understand that anyone would be a little bit peeved if they exited a portal to find themselves a few dozen feet in the air dash. After being chased by an all-devouring monster that just so happened to be coming through that very portal right when we were using it that no one had warned us about. Of course. There was more nervous laughter. Of course. But you've been informed that I'm banned from Soul Society, and surely your understanding of how difficult it would be to illegally create a portal under such circumstances. Of course. I agreed. Perfectly understandable why the man who created the Research and Development Division in the Soul Society, mentor to the current head of that division, and person infamous for dozens of morally gray experiments and inventions would have difficulty with such a task. Hearing him choke on his own spit was amazing. Especially considering that man clearly has never attempted such a thing before and would have no idea how to even go at such an endeavor. Yeah. He dumbly nodded his head, no doubt having come to the conclusion that Yoruchi spilled every possible bean and was currently fearing for his life. Exactly. Though, I feel that we are in agreement that a thing such as that wouldn't necessarily be enough to make me want to hit you. I'm sure you've got more evidence to back up a belief like that. As I spoke, I stepped up, casually grabbing a can of tea off one of the shelves, checking the expiration date, and cracking it open. I maintained eye contact as I walked up until I was right in front of him, then calmly sitting down cross-legged with my free hand resting in my lap, cracking my fingers one at a time to maximize his nervousness. Well, I can sympathize with how angry someone could theoretically become if they were to encounter 3 captains in their quest to rescue a single girl of no substantial level of power. A girl whom I only learned after the fact was intended to never recover said level of power due to a morally unethical invention somehow finding its way into her body by completely unknown means. The blonde was at the level that he simply froze up. You found out about the dash, his voice was weak. I found out about the Hogyoku. I confirmed. The last knuckle on my free hand cracking was as loud as a bomb from how silent the room became. I should start running. You have until I finish this tea. I'm not paying for it, by the way. I was halfway through the can, and he was halfway across the shoten. All front-liners. The 4th Division is being attacked. Kisuke's voice was strong over the Tentikura. We need immediate assistance fending off the Wandenrake. All of our eyes widened. Ichigo, Unohana. I'll hold them off here. Zaraki immediately roared. You go to the 4th. As much as I wanted to argue, and not allow Kenpachi to be by himself, Nozarashi was too big to be used inside the tight halls of the medical division. Unohana and I slung an arm over each other's shoulders wordlessly, and I shot us forward in Shuunpa. It took only a few seconds before we were inside, and the original Kenpachi immediately sprang forward to decapitate for Soldat in a single slash. Zangetsu was sheathed, it too dangerous to swing around my dual blades until we evacuated everyone. Instead, my acero enveloped my arms up to my biceps and I lunged forward, clawing out the throats of everything wearing sheer white I passed by. Unohana and I have entered the 4th Division. I called across the spell. What's the plan? Kuratsuchi opened a portal to the 12th in the intensive care wing. Evacuate everyone there and prevent the Quincy from following. Unohana, you guard the portal. I'll work on clearing a path. I ordered immediately. She didn't waste time with a response, darting down a hall towards intensive care. Sinking deeper into my hollow instincts, I leapt down the halls, my pesquisa pulsing every few seconds to keep track of everyone in my vicinity. Heads were crushed under my grip, organs were removed from their cavities, bodies were ripped apart. There was no doubt I painted a horrifying image, but I couldn't let that slow me down as I pulled doors straight out of their frames and bellowed to those inside where to evacuate. My sandals were ripped apart as my acero enveloped my legs up to my knees. My talons dug into the floors and pushed me faster, giving me sharper movement on the level of Grimjow in his Resurrection. I glanced behind me and saw medics moving injured patients as quickly as they could toward safety. My pesquisa pointed out someone coming at me from the right, and I snapped around with my claws ready only for the blade of the soldat to bounce uselessly against a glowing orange triangle. My hand pointed and the shield disappeared, perfectly in time with me stepping forward to impale my arm through the soldat's heart. I spotted Oriheim coming out from a room, as well as over half a dozen patients behind her inside. I've got this hallway, keep going. I nodded in acknowledgement before pouncing around the corner. BLD and torn carcasses followed my path as I ripped apart every Quincy in front of me. A distant explosion of Ryatsu caused my body to tense, before I matched it with Kenpachi using his Bankai and I relaxed. That marked a practical guarantee that he would be fine. One of my hands wrapped around the top of a medic that had tripped, and I spun to hurl them back in the direction I came from. I tuned out their scream as I reoriented myself and continued bounding around the hallways, carving apart anything my hollow nature instinctively marked as an enemy. Before I knew it, I had gone in a complete circle, and I tore through a few more hallways before I found myself in the hall leading to intensive care. Unohana was splitting apart soldats as fast as they entered her view, and she was introduced to my presence through me spearing a hand through the back of a soldat's throat. There was no need to acknowledge each other, or even coordinate, as we silently each picked a side and continued our protective rampages. A group of 3 medics and 4 patients limped down one of the halls as quickly as they could, Kisuke taking up their rear and rapid-firing Kido spells behind him. "This is the last of them," he announced, which seemed to invigorate the soldats to try harder as much as it did Unohana and I. A layer of BLD coated the walls, floor, ceiling, and ourselves. Once Kisuke passed us, we retreated in time with him, majorly assisted by me unleashing a Zero behind us. The portal was easy to spot, eerily similar to a Garganta, and we herded ourselves through it immediately. Unlike the void space of a Garganta though, as soon as we stepped through the opening, we stepped into a tightly packed room in the 12th. I heard a loud, metallic click, and the portal snapped shut. There was a collective sigh of relief from just about everyone, and I checked in on Zaraki. His Ryatsu seemed just fine, Yachiru was on top of him, and the most powerful signature I could sense around him was overkill. I dropped my shoulders with a relieved breath and refocused on the group around me, content that the captain of the 11th would come back beaching about not having any worthwhile opponents. A single step forward was marked by a wet slap, and I glanced down to see that my hands and feet were dripping in BLD, which I could feel all the more distinctly now that I had let my acero fade. "Is someone available to wash me off?" I embarrassingly asked. "There's a sink opposite the dissection table to your left." Kuratsuchi actually sounded disgusted, and then I remembered that, as much of a disturbing freak he was, he did make a point about keeping a clean lab. "Thanks." I tried to ignore the sounds of my feet leaving puddles on the floor as I stepped up to the sink and washed my hands, being pleasantly surprised by the power behind the faucet. It was practically power washing my hands. Once I finished washing my extremities, I turned around, finding Unohana kneeling by a patient with Kaido working at a stomach wound, and Kisuke sitting on a chair with his head in his hands. I mentally stuttered for a moment, not at all liking the image of Kisuke seemingly struggling mentally with something. But I had to prioritize. Kisuke was unharmed, and we just dumped about 50 injured people into a single room. I clapped my hands loudly to catch everyone's attention, before cupping my hands around my mouth. "All right, everyone. I understand this is a sheet situation and we need to work out all sorts of things with the sudden change in environment, but there is some good news to this." While several Shinigami perked up at the possibility of an upside, I found it difficult to ignore Kisuke flinching. "We're in one big butt room with no dividing walls, so if we get the injured to huddle close enough together, we can fit a lot more of you inside Oriheim's Shun Rika at once." Everyone seemed to very much agree that was good news, and the Shinigami of the 4th started talking with each other about how best to group patients together. Unohana even looked pleased by the idea, as if she hadn't immediately thought of that. But then Kisuke went from holding his head in his hands to leaning back against the chair he was in limply. There was an empty look in his eyes. Oriheim Inoue did not make it out of the 4th division. Those within 10 feet of the man all froze, but the noise in the room prevented the majority of its occupants from hearing his words. "What?" My own voice came out much sharper than I intended, and it drew the crowd's attention once more. From what I was able to put together, Oriheim Inoue was surrounded on all sides by soldats and overwhelmed. I was unable to fight my way to her before she was dead. The room stared at the blonde. I could tell just by looking at him, that the collective horror and dread of everyone present couldn't weigh as much on his mind as his own self-hatred. I was certain others would likely mistake his monotone as him being unfeeling, but I knew him better. It was his own desperate attempt to separate himself from the pain, his mind reasoning that he couldn't let it get to him or else more deaths would occur. Kuratsuchi screamed in anger and I heard something slam against a wall. How could you let someone so valuable be killed, you lackadaisical cretin? Kuratsuchi, I ordered flatly, leave the room. He whirled around at me, and I didn't even have to look in his direction for him to understand that yelling at me right now was not a good idea. He scoffed as viciously as he could and I heard him slam the door behind him. I used shikaho to dispose of the body. The gray-eyed man continued after a moment. I didn't want to even consider the possibility of zombie using her body. As I collapsed to my knees, I heard the resulting whispers, of people finding themselves both disgusted and relieved that he was able to think and act in such a mechanical manner to take such a precaution. They were horrifyingly grateful that he ensured Oriheim's Shun Rika couldn't be used against us. But I knew what he really said. I knew that what he really wanted was to make sure zombie couldn't use my friends against me again. Kisuke was groaning on the ground, covered in bandages applied by Tessai, as I sat on the other side of the tea table, gratefully eating a rice ball the apron-wearing man prepared. Did you have to go for below the belt? I was contractually obligated to attempt to castrate you. I informed. By who? Me. He groaned into the floor. So, have you figured it out yet? Well, I've figured out that you're not the version of Ichigo Kurosaki that left to rescue Rukia Kuchiki a month and a half ago. He flopped onto his back. I've narrowed it down to some sort of time/space manipulation, but I don't know if you're from a parallel universe or a different point in time. From the future. I confirmed. Aizen got that far along in his plans? Nah, Yhwach. Those stories about a confined Quincy King are true. Don't say that like you haven't been suspecting it since my mom died. Okay, just because your mother was mysteriously defeated by a hollow that she should have been able to defeat without even taking damage and that happened simultaneously with Ryukin Ishida's wife. Okay, yeah, I'll stop. All it took was a single mildly irritated eyebrow raise to get the man to understand he was making a mistake. I believe I'm not incorrect in assuming both that you have time travel to stop Yhwach and that it took longer than it should have for you to return from Soul Society because you were assisting in training the captains. And now you understand why we kept you completely in the dark for so long. The slightest bit of information and you figure out everything. I groused. I've noticed that you visited the Vizard on your own after the event where you went on a rampage, and I suspect that you had already attained control over your hollow powers in the initial timeline. In which case, I can only presume that you learned some sort of trick involving hollowification that you then retaught to your fellow Vizard. He thought aloud. Proving my point. I pointed out with faux annoyance. On multiple occasions since then, either Anohana Taicho or Yoruchi-chan have pulled me from the Shoten, wherein my cameras have shown that you and whoever does not distract me go into my basement. By the way, do you realize how expensive it is to replace the cameras every time you break them down there? He continued on while I politely sat back and let him do his thing. I strongly suspect that your sessions with Anohana Taicho involve something to do with her relinquished title as the first Kenpachi, and that your sessions with Yoruchi-chan almost assuredly revolve around her Kakubyo Senki. Though, that doesn't necessarily explain why they spend so much time around you, nor why you had them request me to enroll them at your school as your personal nurse and therapy animal respectively. Considering my sensors have not indicated any Senkamen nor Garganta opening outside of during the Kasumiyaji incident, I am left to assume you do not visit the Suriidii on the regular to assist in others' training. In this case, it is reasonable to hypothesize that the reason they are around you so often is not for practical purposes relating to your time traveling, but emotional purposes relating to some sort of relationship. He paused for a moment to tilt his head my way, asking for confirmation. I gave a single, amused nod. The gray-eyed scientist smiled and fixed his head. Furthering that train of thought, if you only sought to have me enroll them so that the three of you would be able to spend more time together, you wouldn't necessarily have to have me enroll them in those particular roles. Yoruchi-chan has the necessary training to be able to act the part of a high schooler, and Anohana Taicho could have also fulfilled the role of a teacher's assistant, for example. Thus, I feel that I am on the right track to believe that there was XPLCT purpose in those particular roles. You don't appear to require any form of assisted living, case in point that they do not accompany you wherever you go, which leads me to the conclusion that they actually provide some form of mental rehabilitation for you. The most common dash, Kisuke cut himself off and tilted his head back my way, realization and concern filling his eyes. You have post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah. While you were waiting for me to step inside, I was trying to psyche myself up enough to see you. You're the only one that made it out alive beyond myself. Eyes the color of smoke widened, before darkening. Then this isn't to attain the best possible outcome. He understood. This is to attain any positive outcome. A nod from me was all he needed as he sat up, done pretending the bruises I gave him meant anything. Considering the information I've collected, I don't believe I'm wrong in presuming I was the brains to your brawn. Got it in one. My memorization of everything that the Wandenrake are going to do combined with your extensive counterplanning. Dying smoke brightened to vicious storm clouds. They won't know what hit them. I blinked at the madness in his gaze, that flawless fusion of paranoia, a loose grip on ethics, and a crazed drive to win that made him one of the 5 special war threats. Once again, a reminiscent smile floated onto my face, and I didn't hesitate to reach out and pat the shoulder of an old friend. Good to have you back, Frankenstein. He tilted his head on genuine confusion, as the gears in his mind worked. Aizen is the one that masterminded the circumstances behind your BRTH, though. A bark of laughter came from me. Close enough. You're the one that got me working. Shock dressed his face as his eyes shined at the praise. It was honestly such a coincidence that I had to remind myself the Soul King was dismembered and incapable of making any effect on the worlds outside of keeping them from collapsing. I had been lounging on the grass by the river, enjoying the breeze and the feel of my mother's presence in the air. There was a mild chill from it being late at night in early fall, the sky dark with the stars twinkling up above. Overall, there had been a great atmosphere. I was halfway to falling asleep when I sensed a Garganta opening. At first, it had been my full intention to let Shiro out to take down the hollow. Then I realized I was intimately familiar with the Ryatsu signature of the hollow in question. My eyes snapped open as I shot up into a sitting position, my head pointed directly in the direction of where the signature appeared. Is that? I had to ask my Zanpakuto, needing the confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. Yes, that is indeed Grand Fisher. Asen's voice was low. And it looks like the BSTRD went and turned himself into an Arrancar, too. There was a feral glee in Shiro's tone, eager to deal out long-deserved punishment. Like it'll help him. That glee was shared as I had already gotten up and was halfway to his location. The boost in power and his probable boost in ego will ensure that his crushing defeat will be all the more satisfying. With that encouragement, I moved even faster. The jackass seemingly was basking in the moment of returning to the living world after so long. SCKS to be him. My shoe slammed into his nose and sent him flying back about 3 blocks. He recollected himself a bit faster than I thought he would. I was almost impressed. The Arrancar snarled and looked up, his voice loud and haughty. You should have tried to kill me with that sneak dash. His eyes widened as he registered who I was, before his face curled into a full bloodthirsty grin. Kurosaki Ichigo. I don't have to go looking for you. What glorious luck I have, to evolve into an Arrancar and have you come to me to be the first victim of my newfound power. Oh, the invincible confidence in his voice was delicious. The fanged smile upon my face was sure to have made anyone weaker than a captain sheet their breathes. You're out of the loop, you deformed hamster. I called back. You ain't the only one that got stronger since we last met, Furball, and let me tell ya, you're in for a beating. Shiro whispered in the back of my mind to use my acero. The pleased hum from Asen was all I needed to have the black talons form over my hands. Yeah, using Quincy powers wouldn't have the intended effect. Oh, but you do not even understand to what level I have evolved as a hollow. Behold. The no longer an overgrown hamster reached back behind him and very slowly drew the blade sitting there in a manner that was probably supposed to be menacing. Witness the dash. Am I interrupting something? Both of us snapped our heads to my left and caught sight of my dad, in his Shinigami garb with a hand casually resting on the hilt of Injetsu. I immediately let my acero drop as I brightened even further. Oh, hey, I didn't realize your powers came back so quickly. He seemed touched at my words. I'm not quite at 100% you know, Kisuke told me it would take a couple more months for that, and I still gotta shake the rust off. It's been 20 years since I last picked up Injetsu, he's pretty grumpy about it. Yeah, I can sense your Ryatsu level now. You're at, what, 60% right now? Something like that. Dad tilted his head. You're that familiar with my Ryatsu without my powers sealed? We never told you. The man shook his head in response to my question. You were part of the front-liners during the BLD war. It was you, me, Chad, Unohana, and Kenpachi. We all handled the small fry so that everyone else could conserve energy and strategize. That seems pretty exhausting. Don't know if I'd want to be in a position like that. I snorted at his complaint. Yeah, you said that last time. Kairaku mentioned that you had some of the best stamina out of all the current and ex-captains, so we kept forcing you to join us until you stopped trying to run away. You couldn't give these old bones a break. I'm ancient. I need my beauty sleep. A snort came out of me from his words. Unohana is one of the founding members of the Godai, you have no ground to stand on. Counterpoint, Unohana-chan is scary though. What does her being scary have anything to do with Dash? You dare ignore me? Grand Fisher screamed indignantly. What fools you are. Pitiable Shinigami, unaware of how great the threat that stands before them. Need I remind you, I slaughtered every Shinigami that came to hunt me for 54 years before I evolved to the level of power I possess now. The two of us stared at the hollow in surprise. My left hand lifted into the air. No you didn't. I pointed at myself with my left hand. Case in point. The Arrancar sneered, and whipped his blade around to create a gust of wind. A single mark that I will rectify now. He lifted his sword arm high in the air with a broad grin. Behold. Witness the size of my Zanpakuto. Dad and I stared in bafflement for a moment. Dad broke first, a snort leaving him that devolved into snickering, which I joined him in. Why are you laughing? My blade is enormous. I laughed harder, while Go-chin was able to collect himself enough to speak. Okay. He sounded rightfully confused. You've got a dash, he couldn't stop the snort of laughter. A really big Zanpakuto. Are we supposed to be intimidated by that? You must be even more foolish Shinigami than I thought. The size of a Zanpakuto is reflective of how much Ryatsu its wielder possesses. Shrivel in fear as you realize how much my blade dwarfs the two of yours. A wee squeezed out of my throat as I clutched my stomach. We're the foolish ones. Dad was too incredulous to laugh. Buddy, who told you that and left out the second half of it? What second half? Hollow-san, you're correctly informed that the natural size of a Shinigami's Zanpakuto is reflective of their Ryatsu, but if they didn't control the size of their blades, captains would be walking around with swords the sizes of skyscrapers. I controlled myself enough to offer my input. I'd probably be dragging a blade half the size of Japan if that were the case. I laughed. You're lying to get out of what's about to happen to you. Are you seriously watching us break down laughing in front of you and think we're trying to confuse you? Dad suched arms so that his right wrist was atop the hilt of Injetsu so casually most anyone would have missed it. Here, let me show you dash. I held a hand out in front of him. Hold on a second. Dad blinked, before realization came upon his face. Oh, is this guy important for something? Do we need to do something fancy to deal with him? You couldn't have realized, your Ryatsu sense having been sealed away until just recently. I turned to glare back at the monster, but he's the guy that killed Mom. The SWCH from jovial to stone-faced was instantaneous. Oh. There was the ex-captain of the 10th and clan head of the Shiba clan. Yeah. Grand Fisher made the mistake of smiling sadistically. Indeed I am, Kurosaki Ichigo, and who I presume is his father. The Arrancar cackled. I am the one that devoured Kurosaki Masaki, and tonight I will dine on the rest of Dash. Both of his arms were separated from his body, Dad and I each having silently coordinated who would take what side. The BSTRD screamed in pain and began stumbling around. It's not good to harbor hatred in your heart, you know. My father commented. Shibas are passionate. Passionate rage isn't good for anyone. I didn't stop you from going for a killing blow. I responded. No, you didn't. He agreed. We each turned back to the murderer, each of us resting our blades on our shoulders. So how far do we want to take this? I know that his ability as a hollow was a lure that could take the image of people he's eaten, and he would use that to both bait his prey and torment them. Did he use Masaki to bait you or torment you? Torment. I apparently became the first Shinigami that managed to hurt him after that, though. He nodded. Like I said, Shibas are passionate. He adjusted his grip on his sword. The idea of having the first thing in Jetsu's flames torch after so long be my wife's killer sounds pretty appealing, but that doesn't leave much for you. I've been wanting round 2 for a DMN long time. I agreed. When we fought on the anniversary of Mom's death, he ran. Said he wouldn't lose a second time, but it sure felt like I lost. How? The murderer spat, having collapsed on the ground and floundered until he was facing us. How did you hurt me? I evolved into an Arrancar. Neither of us were really in the mood to laugh at his stupidity anymore. Retired Captain. Dad grunted. Soul King candidate. I decided to be visceral with my explanation. Both of us were able to smirk in dark satisfaction at how Fisher recoiled in fear. As I contemplated what would be the optimal way to make him suffer for his crimes, my self-description echoed in my head. The Soul King was technically in charge of the transfer of souls from one realm to another, which made me start thinking about how I could F with his CYCL of reincarnation. Using anything Quincy was obviously out, as the monster had definitely consumed a lot of souls and deleting all of them would not be good, plus my mom was one of those souls. And there would be no finishing that train of thought. We were naturally going to finish him off with our Zanpakutos, as that would purify him and all the souls inside of him. As eager to make him experience pain as we weren't going to be stupid about it. I did have my own hollow abilities, which would freak him out something fierce. I could maybe introduce him to my hollow form, threaten to eat him, perhaps. But still, even though we clearly wouldn't kill him with them, I really wanted to use some Quincy powers on him, since Mom had. That was an idea. Ichigo, I understand I inhabit your mind, but how? Asen, for perhaps the first time ever, was utterly dumbfounded by what conclusion I had reached. King, Shiro was as flabbergasted as his other half, what the F dash. Okay. I started, shifting on my feet and looking at Dad, not letting my Zanpakuto's words get to me. I might have an idea. Shoot. He encouraged. I've just gotta say, I truly have no basis whatsoever for coming up with this. Just so you're not concerned, absolutely nothing I have ever learned or been taught has suggested this is possible. I'm pretty sure Kisuke wouldn't come up with an idea like this. Well, Shibas have always been a little crazy, too. He preemptively tried to justify. So, a hollow's DMT personality is just whoever has the strongest soul, right? Yeah. And Mom had been hit by Oshwallen right before we were attacked, so she was just a normal human when he ate her, which is why she didn't immediately become the DMT personality. That and why he didn't spontaneously combust. He followed along. It also stands to reason that her soul is naturally attuned to Quincy Ryatsu, having been a Quincy and all. I know nothing about Quincy biology, but that sounds like it would make sense. The ex-captain paused for a moment. Son, I'm fairly certain trying to feed Grand Fisher Quincy Ryatsu will just erase him. Under normal circumstances, that's absolutely correct. And how do you plan to change those circumstances? By eating him. What? There was the incredulous look I was expecting. Hear me out. I held up my hands to ensure he didn't interrupt me. I'm part hollow, so I can eat people. Wait, have you dash? We'll discuss that later. We were not going to have that conversation here. What I was thinking, was that if I very, very carefully eat him, while simultaneously very, very carefully inserting Quincy Ryatsu into what's left, there might be a non-zero chance that Masaki's soul will be drawn to it and grow stronger though it. That is the single craziest and most nonsensical thing I have ever heard. Yup. Let's do it. Like son, like father, I guess. Hey, Grand Fisher. I shouted over at the writhing body. What? This is going to hurt a lot. He tried to flee. It failed miserably. I looked over at Dad while holding the errand car by his ankle. We're gonna need to move somewhere private. I need to release my Shirkai in order to do this right, and we can't afford to let the Wandenrake know I can use Quincy powers. He hummed in response, holding a hand to his chin. If this does work, then I don't want to do it in Kisuke's basement. I'd like to not have his presence hanging over my head. What areas aren't watched by the Quincy? Nowhere that Kisuke didn't build. Another idea came to mind. But we can create a blind spot with some Kido. Let's go to where Mom died. I've always felt her presence there, maybe it can help the process. It's not like we're working with any conventional sense of logic, he shrugged, let's go. Setting up a box of camouflaging Kido that would comfortably hold all three of us was pretty easy, though the Ryatsu blocking Kido I layered on top of that so that the Quincy wouldn't investigate why my Ryatsu seemed to be sitting in a spot that appeared to be uninhabited took some effort. Once that was done, I silently released my Shirkai and sat atop Grand Fisher's CHST. Alright, this needs to be done perfectly to even be hypothetically possible, so I'm gonna need your guys' help. I'll control the flow. Asen, you need to watch his Ryatsu for any fluctuations. It's not like we have any idea what we're looking out for, so point out anything. Shiro, you deal with whatever is coming in. And warn me if we accidentally start absorbing him. I don't want this piece of sheet in my soul. Sure. Asen appeared silently resigned. Okay, I've never done this before, so don't hesitate to tell me what it feels like, okay? I asked the errand car beneath me. What are you going to dash? He screamed as I drove both of Zangetsu's blades into his CHST in a reverse grip. Once that easy initial step was complete, I shut my eyes and began to focus as I started the flow. Through my Quincy powers, I was able to pull Fisher's Ryatsu towards Shiro's blade, which then began to slowly nibble at the energy, carefully prodding each iota of spirit energy in an attempt to check that we didn't accidentally eat Mom. In opposition, Asen's blade began to slowly leak my Quincy Ryatsu, with a gentle hope in my mind that the fact that it was my Ryatsu would make the process easier, if not possible. Thankfully, the murderer didn't have enough limbs to really struggle, so I didn't have to also focus on keeping him in place, and just directed my attention towards both ends of the flow. Furthermore, under the incredibly intense focus that practically functioned as a microscope, I was able to exceedingly roughly decipher the minuscule nuances of his soul that probably indicated another soul that had been transmuted into his overall being. In all honesty, I had no idea if Shiro was able to tell which soul was Mom's, but I had faith that he had the capability to. Grand Fisher was also screaming something fierce, and describing a burning sensation that was probably from the Quincy Ryatsu. My eyes snapped open and all three of us paused in our actions when we felt a part of the Aaronkar come close to the Quincy Ryatsu and feed off it. I lifted my head to smile sunnily at Dad. Grab the twins. His eyes widened in response to my words, and a brilliant grin of his own came upon his face. I'll take my time. The man's voice was warm and gentle, almost humming the words rather than speaking them. My mouth started to hurt from how widely I was beaming. He promptly left, in a quiet, relaxed stroll. I refocused and doubled my efforts in the Ryatsu transfer, vigilantly increasing the rate and watching how everything reacted. The soul that was taking in the Quincy Ryatsu was swelling pleasantly, taking up more room and steadily taking a shape. There wasn't any physical changes, but I pegged that as due to Fisher still being the demon soul. I continued the process, keeping it slow enough that I didn't seem to harm anything, but still going as fast as I felt I could otherwise. Which was why I had been so caught off guard when the soul all of a sudden yanked on the drip of Quincy Ryatsu and the Aaronkar began spazzing out, his eyes blank. It was immediate to increase the flow of Ryatsu and the body beneath me glowed a pure Quincy blue before exploding. Zangetsu was pulled out and I stepped back, kind of wanting to keep the transfer going for safety but not wanting Mom to wake up with swords impaled through her chest. In my impatience, I couldn't wait for the smoke to clear, swngng a blade to blow it all away. And lying on the grass where the murderer had been, was Mom. Wearing the exact same pink sweater, magenta shirt, and purple sundress that she died in. Zangetsu was sheathed instantly, and I cautiously stepped up to her. Her eyes fluttered open, the color of hot chocolate, locking onto me instantly. The briefest, tiniest, infinitesimally small flash of confusion passed through her gaze, before she saw my hair and was a third of the way off the ground with her arms open to hug me. I met her halfway, each of us hugging the other tight enough that neither of us could breathe, and we didn't care. Tears burned at my eyes and I let them flow. Her embrace was as warm as I remembered, as completely enveloping, despite that her arms couldn't wrap around me as much as they did all those years ago. My own circled around her with room to spare, a dramatic difference from my memories, and one I couldn't ever mind. She was drowning in my robes, her body so much smaller than I realized. We did nothing more than hold each other for many blissfully long seconds. I felt my clothes grow wet, but I knew there was nothing to be concerned about. She shifted a little so that her mouth wasn't blocked by cloth. "You're so big now." Her voice was watery. "I am." I wetly agreed. "I'm really big now. I love you, so much." The words erupted from her mouth like nothing in the world was more important. Nothing was. "I love you, Mom." She sniffled, and her arms slid from my back. I pulled back in her hold, and we wordlessly agreed to keep a hold of each other while at arm's length. "How?" She seemed to fumble with her words for a moment, looking me over in amazement. "You're wearing Shinigami robes." She settled on, a shining smile on her face. A wet laugh escaped me, and I was caught up in the joy. "Don't worry." I was going to show her with my hands, then realized I didn't want to let go. Instead, what was visible of my chest glowed blue with blood vein. "I got a little something from you, too." Mom's face shifted to overjoyed awe, and her own hands slid around to ghost her fingertips over the highlighted veins. Appealing laughter sang from her mouth that made me laugh in turn. Her tears did not end, and her eyes glistened with those tears as she raised her hands to hold my face. Neither of us cared that my tears poured over her hands, and both of us knew it. I nuzzled into her touch, and she pushed her hands in all the more. "How?" She spoke breathlessly, her tears still streaming. "How am I here?" My lips quirked down a little, but my smile persevered. "By accident." I explained. Grand Fisher came around again, and I had the craziest idea about pumping Quincy Ryatsu into him in the hope that it would make you the DM anti-soul. A sweet smile came from her. It's good that you tried it out, she sniffled, but my own hands came up to hold her face as I tilted her head so our eyes met. I know. The announcement came out in a breath. This is just to get what we didn't get the chance to have. Her eyes widened as she understood, and her mouth wavered before she slid her hands behind my neck and pulled me in for another hug that I welcomed wholeheartedly. My baby boy. Her voice was tight with emotion. You're so mature. Delving into that statement would ruin the mood, so I left it untouched. Mom. Both of us paused to take in how good that one word sounded in this moment. Can I introduce you to my Zanpakuto? They would never have considered it a possibility of meeting her face to face, and that was why I asked. Your father said that's difficult for Shinigami to do. I smirked at her concern and let blood pulse through me again. I'm not like most Shinigami. I could see the glee in her eyes at the reaffirmation of my Quincy abilities. I opened my mouth, ready to warn her of Shiro, then decided against it. I knew how she would respond, and nothing would be able to change that. Then I'd love to meet your Zanpakuto. They resisted a little, each scared in their own unique ways of how she would react. At the gentle reminder that they weren't abandoning their fear, I felt the usual light tug that came with the manifestation of Zangetsu. Shiro was sitting on the ground to my right, Asen a few feet behind us. The hollow had his head down, his body language meek and hunched in. I couldn't see Asen, but I could tell he was just as anxious and worried of rejection, or even worse, rage. Shiro flinched when Mom reached out and passed her fingers through his hair, wherein she brushed her hand down until his chin sat in her palm and she lifted his face. He offered no resistance, and met her eyes. Spheres of hot chocolate widened, then softened, and she quickly fisted the front of his shihakusho before pulling him forward, wrapping an arm around each of us. We were tucked in so that each of our heads were over her shoulders. My hollow half tensed, before he curled into the embrace and we each held her tightly. You too. Mom called out to Asen, who silently stepped forward, but remained standing. Come on, there's room enough for 3. I felt it, his shock at her instantaneous acceptance, like he didn't make the connection that she saw him as an aspect of myself and therefore deserving of her love. Pride filled me as he kneeled down and I felt his arms encircle the 3 of us, and it felt complete. Shiro purred, and her addictive, bubbly laughter filled our ears again. Asen pulled away, never having been the sort for physical affection, and Shiro and I shared a grin before we adjusted ourselves. A surprised noise came from Mom, before she saw us shift back and lean forward, then the shine in her eyes returned full force as she folded her legs under her. We laid back to back, with our heads resting on her thighs, and her fingers wove through our hair to create bliss. Ishin is coming with Yuzu and Karen. Asen announced for the 3 of us. They are taking their time so that we may enjoy this privacy together. That's good. I want to spend some time with each of my children. She hummed happily. How old are you now? And don't say 10, you'll give me a heart attack. Laughter came from both Shiro and I. 26, I answered. But the twins are both 11. Some stuff happened that caused the gap to widen, but it's fine now. Everything is all right. I took measure to warn and soothe in the same breath. She took an audible breath. If everything is fine now, then okay. What do you do for a living? I have a really high position in the Godai, higher than where Dad was before he left. But I live in the living world, in the clinic with the rest of the family. You'd have enough money with a job like that to buy your own house, wouldn't you? She didn't sound accusatory, just curious. I do. I agreed. Not interested right now. There was a pleased hum from her. You have a lot of friends? Yup. All 3 of us do. A beautifully excited inhale came from her. Well, don't leave me in the dark. Tell me about them. I ain't friends with a lot of people. They don't deserve it. Shiro hummed. But I got witch, knuckles, melons, and pineapple. A giggle came from Mom. So you like to give out nicknames, huh? Who are they? Pineapple's a dumbass that's got his hair done up like a fruit. But he's protective, and dumb in a funny way. We play games all the time. Melons is a big flirt, but she ain't a floozy. She just likes the reactin'. If she can get a back and forth goin', that's just as fun for her. She and I prank PPLE a lot. Knuckles is like a real good cookie. Hard-ass grump on the outside, but nice to hang with. We like to spar, and he uses me as a test dummy for his grillin'. We also like to scare the PSS out of PPLE. He, of course, smiled at that. Which is my favorite though. Looks all cute and unassuming, but she's a lieutenant that deserves the position. Real good with keto, anytime Melonses and I need some punch to our pranks, we go to her. She's a lil shaken up, but our crazies work together. Which is like a third sister Tommy. Mom's smile was practically made at the middle of the day. What about you? I enjoy having discussions with Chojiro Sasakaibe over tea. We often like to talk about tea, though we also frequent his interest in Western culture. Not one for a lot of words, are you? She teased. Her hand passed through my hair, and I took that as my turn. I've got friends from all over. I let a lazy grin come over my face. Friends from high school, from Soul Society, from Hueco Mundo, even. Never really mattered to me what you are, just whether you're a decent person or not. Pride radiated from her. There's Oriheim, a sweet little airhead with a passion for mixing ingredients together. Chad, the silent giant type that's always got my back. Yuryu, Ryukin's kid. He's all tsundere about our friendship, and he's amazing with a needle and thread. She laughed it, no doubt seeing all the similarities between him and his father. Kigo, a goofy dumbass that's perfect anytime you need to raise the mood. Mizuiro, always on his phone but with one ear on whatever we're talking about. Still friends with Tatsuki, she made second place national recently. Good for her. She cheered. Rukia is the one that more or less got me started with my powers. I will always be grateful to her for giving me the means to protect. Zaraki is a bloodthirsty nut job, but we both like to fight and we both have little ones that will fight anything for. Shinji is sarcastic and loves to do everything as confusingly as possible, but he's like an uncle that watches out for me where he can. Yamamoto is a grumpy old fart that's perpetually tired of my sheet because rules are something to actively do the opposite of. Mom's laughter filled the air. Nell is kind, and has a crush on me that I unfortunately don't reciprocate, but she always tries to resolve things by talking it out. Halibel is the queen of Hueco Mundo, she's really diplomatic and actually cares about the safety of those under her watch. Grimjow is an angry pussycat whose head isn't screwed on right, but have a little patience and he's just fine. Those sound like wonderful friends. I could hear the gentle upturn of her lips in her tone. You have anyone you're interested in? That second sentence was a bit more teasing. I do. The words came from my mouth easily. I'm in a three-way relationship. My own lips curled into something knowing. She would know just from this. The two of them are my sons. There was no need to look to be aware the smile on her face could melt the Arctic. The way her hands parsed through mine and Shiro's hair was much more loving. That's good. She breathed, just loud enough for us to hear. A trio of footsteps entered my hearing range. Zangetsu disappeared instantly, a startled noise coming from Mom at the action. But before she could question my Zanpakuto's sudden disappearance, Yuzu, Karen, and Dad entered the area. I semi-reluctantly rolled off Mom's lap and let her jump up and run to the twins. While sitting on the grass, I looked over and embraced the warm feeling that manifested in my chest at seeing the three women of the Kurosaki family wrapping their arms around each other. Taking a quick glance, I could see Isshin felt the same way. I turned so that I was facing the river and looked back at them before patting the ground next to me. The four of them quickly joined me, Yuzu to my left, Karen on her left, then Mom, and finally Dad. Having already gotten my chance, I allowed myself to mostly phase out from the conversation and give Yuzu and Karen the floor. The smile on my face was unending as Karen steadily became more and more passionate about describing her soccer games to Mom. To the point of gesturing with her hands, and miming kicking the ball, even. Yuzu and Mom entered a feedback loop of beaming happiness as they talked about cooking, and Yuzu was given a recipe Mom had always wanted to pass down as a family secret. My cheeks hurt as they talked about grades, as the twins were teased about boys, as Karen complained about the painting in the living room. There was laughter abound as we talked about Dad's goofy antics and Karen and I's response to them. Karen stifled a yawn, and her head was almost instantly gently pulled into Mom's lap. Asen quietly informed me of how long he suspected we had. Once again, my lips quirked, but my smile refused to go down. There was one thing I wanted to do anyway. I looked meaningfully at Mom and Dad. They met my gaze and both silently nodded. Yuzu was drowsy at this point anyway, it being incredibly late for both of them, so I picked up the twins. Winking to Dad, I made sure to walk home at a leisurely pace. I caught his smile before I turned away, and that said all that needed to be said. When we got home, Shiro appeared to pull my keys from my pocket and open the door so I didn't have to adjust my grip on the girls. All was silent as I went to their room and carefully deposited them into their beds so they didn't wake up. I succeeded in the endeavor, and went to the kitchen immediately after. Ichigo-kun. What's going on? Yoruchi asked, coming down the stairs. Your Ryatsu's been in and out. Honestly? Probably the craziest idea I ever had, worked. I explained as I pulled open a cabinet and moved some stuff out of the way from what I wanted to grab. That's why Dad grabbed the twins, and why I put them to bed. Golden eyes blinked in surprise at what I pulled out. You told me that's only for extremely special occasions. On the level of your mother's anniversary. Yup. I confirmed. I'll leave you to it, then. Just make sure to tell Anohana-chan and I in the morning. Don't worry, I will. Good night. She came close and pecked me on the lips. Night. She locked the door behind me as I continued my relaxed stroll. It took me another 15 minutes to return to the Kido barrier. When I entered, I found Mom and Dad leaning into each other, their heads resting atop the other. They both looked up when they heard my feet atop the grass. Isshin blinked. When did you get that? My ID still says I'm 15, so I got Yoruchi to buy it for me a few weeks ago. I like to keep a small stock of it for special occasions. That's. Mom breathed. I nodded. Dad told me a few years back, my time. That's why it's only for special occasions. The two of them smiled fondly. I stepped over and let myself fall back onto my butt on Mom's right, Dad still taking her left. Without needing to be prompted, I pulled a can of Sapporo off the six-pack and handed it to Dad, then a second that was taken by Mom, and a third I kept before sitting the last three down on the dirt in front of us. We shared a look, popped the tabs in unison, and wordlessly toasted before taking a swig of Mom's favorite drink. I smacked my lips a little, it having been a couple years since I last had it, before opening my mouth. You know, the sheet I just pulled with Grand Fisher definitely sits at the top of craziest ideas I've ever had, but I've had a lot of crazy ideas. Go-Chin tilted his head, clearly wondering what I was doing. Like what? Mom asked. Well, the first time I encountered aminos, I had absolutely no idea how to tackle a thing that big. Going for the mask had been ingrained into me pretty well by then, but I was still pretty green with no idea how to stand in the air, so I had no way to reach its face. And your arrows probably would have been too weak to do anything that far away, huh? She smirked. It was easier to swing a sword around like a moron than practice forming a bow or aiming, so I wasn't confident in being successful using my Quincy powers. I rode off. So since I was shit at range, and couldn't get myself over to its face, I figured the next best idea was to get its face over to me. Did you trip it or something? She giggled. I barked out a laugh. Of course not, that sounds smart. I had the bright idea of just chopping it like a tree, cutting its body down piece by piece until its head was at ground level. Both my parents burst into laughter. The funny thing is, I didn't even get a chance to try it. It fired a zero at me, so I used my hollow powers to absorb the Ryatsu through my blade and fire it right back. Yuryu was right next to me, staring at me, and I had no idea that stuff like that was seen as impossible, so I just told him that meant I won our hollow slaying contest. Mom's laugh continued, and I saw as Isshin finally made the connection. Oh, but Ichigo doesn't even know what happened afterwards. He continued the story. Ryukin called me up after our two boys finished up that little game of theirs, and of course he was all Isshin did his best to recreate Ryukin's facial expression. Kurosaki, your son is infecting mine with stupidity. And I was all, he began alternating between his own and Ryukin's expressions. How do I know your son isn't infecting mine with stupidity? And he went, because your entire family is crazy. And I couldn't do anything but pout and agree. Mom and I both laughed into our drinks. I went to Ryukin for training in how to use my Quincy powers. I explained. So I went over to the Ishida mansion and knocked on the door. I guess he happened to be close by, because he's the one that opened the door instead of one of the servants, and as soon as he saw it was me, he slammed the door shut and dropped the deadbolt. Before he walked away, I heard him ask me through the wood, please don't break my front door. Of course, he forgot it was a Kurosaki asking, because, while I agreed to his request, I have manners, I just came to the mansion and asked for training every day for 2 weeks before he eventually said yes. Was he smoking on that last day when he accepted? Mom giggled. Of course he was, the reason he smokes is because he has to deal with us. All three of us paused to laugh. Hey, sometimes I need to smoke, so it's not like we're the only ones that cause chaos. Isshin defended. Oh yeah? Like who? There was a vested interest in Mom's eyes. Dad took the opportunity to point at me. His friend Chad. A bellow of laughter shook my chest, as I knew exactly what he was talking about. Tall boy, towers over me. Built like a steel wall. I couldn't help but raise my chin at that. He comes into the clinic, holding a parakeet in his hand and his back soaked with blood. Ichigo, thankfully, is in the house, and he recognizes Chad on sight. We get him to put the bird on a table, and get his shirt off. While I start dressing the wound, Ichigo takes him through his paces, asking about everything that's happened in the past few days, and this kid? He walked off a motorcycle slamming into him, an I-beam falling on his shoulders, 2 car crashes, and though he didn't know it, it took a hollow clawing his back to finally put him down. Ichigo leaves to deal with the hollow, and I barely finish with cleaning the wound before Chad puts his shirt back on and tries to leave. And to top things off, he succeeded the second time. A snort came from me. He didn't just manage to leave the clinic, he ran around town while being chased by a hollow he couldn't see, and eventually got someone spiritually aware to tell him where it was so he could pull a telephone pole out of the ground and swing at it. I furthered. And he's the sane one of the group. Mom was having difficulty breathing. He's the sane one. She cackled. Orihime absolutely adores red bean paste. She adds it to every meal she physically can. I love the girl, she's like a third daughter to me, Dad agreed, but she wanted to help provide for patients in the clinic once and made sandwiches of red bean paste, salami, butter, banana slices, and grape jelly on wheat bread. We were afraid to touch them. One patient was undergoing anesthesia and got a hold of one when we weren't looking, and she said it was delicious right before collapsing. Well, she's creative. The woman laughed. Yuryu, while fantastic at sewing and possessing a great fashion sense, is also determined to put a Quincy cross on everything he puts together. I paused to take another sip of beer. I stumbled onto a mod soul, and agreeing that he deserved an opportunity to live, I found a lion plushie for him to inhabit. Mod souls can inhabit plushies? She asked. We shoved him into one, and it worked. I shrugged. Her laughter was all I needed to continue. Either way, he got banged up, I forget how, but I knew Yuryu was good with fixing stuff like that, so I asked him for help. Yuryu sewed a dress onto him that made him look incredibly pretty, and made sure to sew a Quincy cross both on the back of his head and as the primary pattern for the embroidery. Ishin gasped. That's why he looks like that. What did you think happened? I thought it was so you could give him to Yuzu. Yuzu stealing him from me was a happy accident. It was sheer coincidence that I received a spirit badge from Yukitake at the same time she did. And that's why he keeps running to your room. It makes so much sense now. He awed. No. He keeps running to my room because that's where he keeps all his pawn mags. Those aren't yours. I have Yoruchi and Unohana. Why would I keep pawn mags? Mom was wheezing to death between us. Dad's mouth flapped for a bit as random noise slipped from his throat. I don't know, I just thought it made sense. What can Khan even do in a plushie anyway? What does he get out of pawn mags? You think I'm supposed to know? I'm just as confused as you are. Does he store it all in the back of his mind and let it all out whenever he's borrowing your body? Rage popped inside of me. Don't even say that. I had no plans one weekend and he deserved the chance to go outside, so I stayed with Chad and let him have my body for the weekend. I came back Sunday afternoon and he presented me a list of places that I am now banned from because of shit he pulled. I didn't even give him any money. Like where? Mom had tears in her eyes from laughing. He went to 4 different strip clubs. I don't even know where they are. I complained. And he told me that he got 6 rounds of drinks from bar owners because I had built up a reputation across town for beating up gang members. I wanted that, but then he got banned from those bars. Both of them were having difficulty breathing. Wait, Ishin begged, I think I know what weekend you're talking about. 3 people that night had to get their stomachs pumped for alcohol poisoning, and everyone was talking about some guy that was having a night on the town leaving a trail of set-off women and restraining orders behind him. Yeah, that was the one. You know, that night reminded me of the chaos that was your middle school dance. I groaned into my palm as Mom's eyes shined. Oh, God, that dance went so wrong. See, at his middle school dance, Ichigo decided to break all social norms and ask Chad if they wanted to go together, purely as friends of course. Neither of them had anyone they were interested in, but they didn't want to be all lonely in the corner, so they went together. Everyone heard that Ichigo and Chad were going to the dance together, so of course some of the more unsavory gangs made plans to crash the dance and send a message using those two. Ichigo first publicly announced that he and Chad weren't an item, second yelled even louder that there was nothing wrong with people of the same SEC liking each other, then third worked with Chad to systematically pummel every single one of the 4 gangs present. And when they were done, Ichigo shouted for the band to continue playing music and the 2 of them went back to enjoying the snacks and punch like nothing had happened. I knew at that point that everyone was basically leaving all decision-making to me, so I figured that if I just tried to keep the dance going, they would follow along. I cried. But instead, everyone just clung to the walls staring at us and I had to pretend I didn't feel their stares while I ate chips. You didn't help matters. Hey, I was the only doctor on site. Someone had to take care of them and make sure they weren't banged up too bad. We did nothing but punch and kick them, how bad could it have been? I reasoned. Chad was involved. That excuse bounced around in my head for a moment. That's fair. At least that was a recognized event, though. Dad laughed again. Well, when the hospital starts getting called once a week to pick up gang members with busted faces that line up perfectly with you coming in late to school with your hands stained in other people's BLD, it kinda becomes routine. And when things become routine, they become boring. Well, at least you and the girls didn't join the betting rings. What made you think that? We started them. I whipped around at him, and he glanced at me out the corner of his eye with a smirk. Both of us froze for a long moment, before we burst into laughter. I guess that tracks, makes more sense now how Karen was able to get more soccer equipment in Yuzu, more kitchenware. Hey, I upgraded the clinic, too. You put childproof locks for a week, got frustrated that you couldn't open them, then took them out in favor of uniforms for the twins. They looked cute in them. People kept asking why they got uniforms and you just slapped a spare doctor's coat on me. You never got the hint to buy your own uniform. What, so you provided for them, but not me? You worked odd jobs. You had your own source of income. You knew I was taking English classes and transcribing Shakespeare into Japanese. That's not an excuse. In what world is a son taking extra lessons out of pure ambition not a valid excuse to provide for him more? When that same son gets into fights with gang members once a week. Not by choice. They hunt me down. That's your fault for winning. So I'm not supposed to win. We continued like that for the next few hours. Our laughter filled the night. Our tears streamed down our faces. Our smiles burned our cheeks. And nothing but an empty can of beer sat between us. King, wake up. Shiro's voice was adamant, I could feel the phantom sensation of him shaking my shoulder. The old man emanated a feeling of shock. Unfortunately, as much as I wanted to listen to them, I had to push through the haze of sleep. My eyelids were heavy, not from exhaustion, but from something I knew I had felt before, though couldn't recall the name of. It wasn't a bad feeling, and I could recognize at least that it wasn't the result of any attack I was aware of. The feeling extended to my body, a pleasant sort of heavy. Not like being under the effects of wabasuk, but like my body was satisfied with just remaining still. Though my hollow's voice had an urgency to it, and it would be stupid to ignore that, so I had to pull myself away from that. I was lying on something soft, again. There was a sense of déjà vu. I had laid on whatever this was before, I just couldn't remember what it was. There was a warmth surrounding me that was easily discernible as other bodies. Two, one at either side. One could be Kisuke, hopefully. The other was a complete unknown. They probably weren't an enemy. I had met some people crazy enough to see an enemy sleeping and lie down next to them, so it wasn't out of the question. My eyes opened slowly, partially because my body was oddly still waking up, partially so whoever was at my sides wouldn't see me snap to attention and do something I wasn't prepared for. Purple and black hair filled my vision, two heads resting on my chest. I had to stop my breath from hitching. That was so painfully familiar, a sight I had missed for so long, but was it true? I got my hands to move, gently brushing my fingers along soft skin. Curves and dips exactly where I remembered them, firm muscle just underneath. I could see chocolate and pale skin. A small pulse of pesquisa confirmed their Ryatsu was the same, but Anohana's was slightly smaller. It wasn't much compared to how much she already had, but it was a noticeable amount. I pulled my eyes open wider, and caught notice of where we were. My room, somehow. My bed. But, it wasn't quite right. It was missing things. I didn't see Tatsuki's gloves, or Ikiku's lieutenant badge, or my Shinigami pass. I had a console I knew I had replaced due to receiving a newer model for my 17th birthday. None of the gifts I had from Yoruchi. There were posters I knew I had taken down. There weren't ones I knew I had put up. Yoruchi and Unohana both began to stir, likely from my pesquisa, it was a bit haphazard due to my fogged mind. This couldn't be a dream, Shiro pulled me out of sleep. This couldn't be from visionary, ignoring that he's been long since dead, the details were too distinct to be something he recreated. Not Aizen, again because dead, but I had never been hit by Kyoka Suigetsu, and he wouldn't make such obvious mistakes when trapping someone in an illusion. I couldn't think of anything else that could make a false reality, nothing that wasn't me trying way too strong to have this make sense, at least. Wait, Kisuke. His time ball. The Jiken Ken. That made more sense, but things still didn't quite line up. I had been aiming for my Bankai training right before Rukia's execution. Zangetsu and I agreed that was the most optimal point, to have the ability to kill Aizen immediately after he was outed while giving myself enough time to readjust after time traveling if necessary. Thinking on it, this definitely was my room in the first year of the Winter War. Well, there still were some details that weren't quite right, like how Yoruchi and Unohana weren't supposed to be in my bed right now. As much as it hurt so good I wanted to cry seeing them again, I was nearly having a heart attack because I only got with them during the BLD war. Yoruchi, as much as she loved teasing me and scaring the shit out of me by slipping into my bed while I slept, wouldn't reach that point until the second year of the Winter War. Unohana and I only started sharing beds about 6 months into the BLD war. Yoruchi's body tensed, just the barest amount. If I hadn't known her so well, I wouldn't have even known she was awake. I knew she was listening to my breathing, seeing if I was asleep or not. Then, upon confirming through that alone, she cautiously tilted her head up, to look at me. She hid it immaculately, I could only see through her mask because I knew everything about her. Confusion, suspicion, trepidation, anxiety. It hit me like a hot iron bat trying to bash through my chst with sheer furious force. One of her hands, they were lying on my chst, slid down a minor amount. It was a small enough motion that no one would have given it any mind, and it perfectly positioned her hand to spear upwards behind my ribs to reach my heart whenever she felt it necessary. I could recognize that I was in my human body, so that would not in any way end the way she thought it would. But God, it hurt seeing her not only not recognize me, but be ready to treat me as an enemy. I had to keep myself from shaking, because she would strike first and figure out why I was shaking after. Hello. She began diplomatically. I saw all of her years of being a stealth commander in action. No visibly threatening actions, no demanding responses, no negative reactions, slow movements to not get the unknown party to respond unfavorably. I swallowed the lump in my throat, employing all the training she had given me to keep my hurricane of emotions unseen. You don't recognize me. The words came out of my mouth. Her mind worked as fast as it could, immediately worried of how someone with unknown abilities would respond if she took too long to answer. No. She reached the conclusion that she didn't have nearly enough information to bullshit that she did. Try as I might, the best I could suppress my reaction to that was a very clear shuddering breath. Unohana reaching complete consciousness was a lot less hidden than Yoruchi's was. Her head twitched back as soon as she recognized the ex-captain across from her. It then twitched down, catching that they both were lying atop a body, before she turned to look up at my face. Like the Werkat, the medic's eyes were filled with confusion and suspicion, but it lacked the trepidation and anxiety. As much as she hid it, the first Kenpachi would always remain, and with it, the confidence that, unless presented with evidence to suggest otherwise, she could win any fight she would find her way into. Hello. The captain greeted, one of her hands flexing. She was in a jigai. She clearly wasn't familiar with it, with how she was subtly stretching her body. I believe I am not the only one confused. Yoruchi's eyes darted to the other woman, before flicking back up to me. I felt the assassin's fingers straighten, ready to attack at the first sign of danger. Looking the raven-haired woman in the eyes confirmed that she did not know who I was either. I felt tears burn at the corners of my eyes, but I bit the inside of my lip strong enough to draw BLD. The small wound automatically began healing, but the pain pulled me away from that whirlpool of despair. I was still teetering on the edge, I could still feel it pulling at my ankles, but I wasn't inside. And no, my breath caught in my throat as they both turned to me. This doesn't. The sheer emotional overload was causing my brain to feel like it was splitting in two. Something's wrong. I reluctantly pulled my hands away from them, and brought them upon the mattress to slowly pull myself into a sitting position. Unohana matched the action, Yoruchi possessing a hidden gratefulness that she could put some distance between herself and the two of us. Unfortunately, she was on my left side, so she couldn't have her back to the window for an easy escape. Neither of them gave a damn about the fact that they were naked, but both were clearly suspicious as to why. That is abundantly clear. The original captain agreed, her eyes flickering over to Yoruchi for only a moment. The question remains as to what happened. I certainly have no understanding of how I could have found my way to the world of the living. And I've got no clue how I ended up, wherever here is. The princess colluded. All of these were great questions, and one more might be able to clear everything up. What's the date? The two of them became confused by my question, but the purple-haired woman glanced to the side nonetheless. That digital clock is saying February 19th. That was absolutely not September 17th. And since my Ryatsu wasn't dead empty, it couldn't have been because the Jikenkan didn't have the fuel to take me farther. Even further, then it definitely didn't make sense that either of them were in my bed, all three of us naked. My head throbbed, the pain at the same time nearly dizzying and centering me from the sorrow. I bit back a gasp, my right hand flinching up slightly as I winced. So you've had pain as well? Unohana narrowed her eyes in thought. Can you say the same, Shihuin-san? A little. She colluded. Not a hangover, and I don't think the aftereffects of some drag. Not if this guy's feeling it too. Golden Pools looked my way suspiciously. It does get worse when I look his way, though. Almost as if we're looking at a missing puzzle piece. Something like that. King, we've got a whole zip code in here covered in this weird but white sheet. Why the F are you telling me about it and not if I ng it up then? To provide proper warning if anything untoward were occur. I have the goddamn warning, then, deal with it. Understanding of my rage, the Zanpakuto was not offended. The head pain immediately got worse, myself unable to rein in the shout of pain as I dropped my head into my hands. Yoruchi was off the bed in the blink of an eye, her hands clenched into fists. Unohana remained sitting with a confidence, curiously bringing her hand up with Kaido glowing. Images and names seared through my mind, memories I now knew I had forgotten, somehow. The past few months since time traveling, the talk with Yamamoto, the bad feeling I got about the Tsunyashiros, being able to properly say goodbye to my mom. I remembered everything before the time travel, in a weird sense. Everything prior to the first time I completed my Bankai training. I hadn't thought about it since waking up, so I didn't really know how I remembered it before, but I could tell that it had been changed now. Something that had been missing was back. But something definitely caused my memories to be locked away. Something had messed with my head, and that of Yoruchi and Unohana's. I tensed my chst and pushed outwards, my body falling onto the bed as my spirit body left, startling the two women. Something had made them forget me. Something had wiped their memories of everything that had happened. And that something was going to pay. I shoved my window open and lunged through it, strkng at full speed towards the Shoten. Kisuke would be able to figure out what was going on. My brain was nagging at me that this was familiar, Zangetsu immediately was on it, hunting through my inner world for an answer. In no time at all, I was at the doors, and flung them open. Oh. Hello. Welcome to Kisuke was cut off by me grabbing him by his top and lifting him into the air. I recognized him grabbing Beneheim. You don't know who I am, but you're supposed to. I announced. I'm certainly getting that impression, yes. Something removed me from everyone's memories, and took some of my own as well. You're gonna help me figure out what, and how to fix it. Other people have been affected? The intrigue over something that could remove memories on a widespread scale immediately brought him to disregard that I basically threatened him to help me. You say you personally have been removed from people's memories. In what way? Have the memories in their entirety been removed, or just your involvement in them? What if your presence is heavily intertwined with a certain memory or action? How does that affect the memory? What if it's removed in its entirety? And of course with the questions. Imma, make this real simple, I growled, bringing him closer so he could see my eyes hollowfy. I'm gonna kill whoever did this, and I need you to point me in their direction. I sensed Yhwach, followed by Unohana, reach the shop. Hey! The workcat shouted. He's annoying on a good day, but he's still my friend. Put him down. I'm not threatening him. I pacified. He's really not, actually. Did you know memories of his existence has been wiped on a widespread scale? I wonder how far it extends. Kisuke leaned his head to look at his fellow exile. I know you can figure this out. Honestly, I'll be surprised if you haven't built something just for a situation like this. I continued. Oh, so you do know me. The blonde awed. I mean, there was no reason to doubt, but that really does confirm it. Do you have something ready or dash? The twins. What? Hamura and Shizuku. I narrowed my eyes, feeling the stares of the three Shinigami, but not caring. The inventor was dropped on his butt, barely able to get a quiet "ow" before I turned to the side, gripped the air in front of me, and pulled a garganta open. Did you just dash? Yhwach's words were cut off by me leaping through the portal. Where are they? Still looking into that, but somewhere in the mid-Rukongai. We need a DMN direction. We should have that at least narrowed down by the time you leave the garganta. I snarled, drawing our sword, and wordlessly entering Shirkai. A few more seconds, and I left the rip in between the worlds. South. The group of Shinigami that all jumped in fear at my sudden entrance were disregarded, as I shot forward in Sonido toward South Rukongai. My instincts barked at me, and I blocked a sword with one of my own. A second one came around, and I blocked that too, before pushing them off me. Kairaku hopped back a few meters, an analytical look to his face. I know you don't know who I am. I'm on my way to kill the a-holes who caused that. I'm on your side, don't make me fight you. I growled. You know I have no reason to believe that, Stranger-san. He hummed. I don't have reason to think you're lying either, but we're in quite hectic times right now. I'm sorry to say I just can't rely on faith at this very moment. It doesn't help matters that you came in through a garganta. While he talked, several officers began to surround me, which I couldn't care less about. No one below captain class could even sufficiently distract me. God damn it, just stay out of my way so I can solve all this before it becomes an even bigger problem. They're somewhere in the 40s. Shiro announced. Slowing me down is giving them time to catch word and hide away. I can find them right now, let me through. I barked. I can tell you're invested in this, but please be understanding. You come out of a garganta in the middle of the Siriidii, use a hollow technique to move around, and while you're not attacking us, I'd be strong pressed to say you're being non-aggressive right now. The flowery captain tried to reason. Mix that with our R&D facing an issue that's hollow in nature, and it doesn't paint you in the best light. Well, guess if what, we are connected. I brought up a blade to point in the direction I was trying to go in, everyone in the vicinity twitching into ready positions. By the fuckers I'm trying to hunt down that you're getting in the way of. And they're anxious little sheets who are ready to bolt at the first sign of danger, so get out of my way before I make you. Oh, dear, I'd have hoped we could resolve this dash. Already knowing he was just buttering me up for a sneak attack, I lunged, a heavy horizontal swing with Shiro's blade. Knowing he was wary of trying to compete with strength that potentially matched my other shown hollow capabilities, a very small part of me felt satisfaction in getting him to jump up above the swing. He was probably expecting me to continue the fight, swng down with his swords. Instead, his blade sparked against my back as I flowed with my momentum, rushing under him before stepping behind and rocketing forward at full speed. Several Kido spells fired at me, most from behind. A shakuho angrily burned against my hiero. I glanced at it for just long enough to peg that it was Nanao's before I continued ignoring it and charging towards the south 40s. As I closed in towards the Rukongai, poor Izuru came up from below, Shikai already active. Snarling, I brought Shiro's blade up above my head before slamming it down. I could see a hint of relief in the lieutenant's face as he brought his blade around, edge up, to block my downward swing. The Zanpakuto blades collided, myself instantly feeling the weapon in my hand double in weight, but not caring. The blonde shot towards the ground from the power in my swing, and I saw his face contort in horror as he watched me seem unbothered by the change in weight then speed forward at full tilt. I soared outside the Siriidii, frustrated that I could only move so fast in Shikai as I crossed the districts. Every second Zangetsu wasn't carving up those memory thieves was a second they could already be running away. District 44. Asen narrowed down. Below that, there was no specifying. Anything past the first 15 didn't bother with street names or differentiating between residential and business areas. I was currently speeding through the early 30s, meaning there was nothing I could do but try to move faster until I was close enough for spirit ribbons to become relevant. At the very least, I didn't have to worry about anything this far out. No one short of Yoruichi or Yamamoto could catch up to me now. Reaching the edge of 44, I flipped around so my feet were out and dropped to the dirt. My heels dug trenches in the ground. By the time I stopped, dust clouds obscured me from sight, though I could hear people shrieking in fear. Focusing, thousands of ribbons all appeared around me. Nearly all were white, a few dozen having the recognizable lavender tint of potential Shinigami powers. Less than 100 red, 2 black that wrapped around a single red. Instantly, I stomped forward, ready to jump out from my landing spot towards the ribbons just a few hundred meters away. A sword uselessly thumped against my chest. F off. I howled as I kicked out, my foot pounding into the stomach of some nameless fodder and sending them somewhere. A baseball of blue energy struck my right shoulder, followed by another empty slab of spirit metal stopping against my armor. I flipped my Quincy blade around and punched the unseated Shinigami in the face, their body leaving my vision and therefore my ability to care. A yellow marble of Ryatsu hit me, and I focused to see a trio in robes standing right in front of a bar. 2 men and a woman. I'm not here for you, PSS off. I spat. One of the men gripped his forearm tighter and cast another spell, just as the woman's sword glowed a little before turning into an axe. The final guy just rushed me, and I felt his bones shift as I smacked him with the side of Shiro's blade. I said dash, the woman blindly screamed, the head of her axe glowing with yellow Ryatsu as she came up on me. My smaller blade cleaved through her stomach. PSS. Off. The guy that had been readying his next spell stumbled back into the doors of the bar, falling through onto his butt. With all the distractions out of the way, I crouched down and jumped, flying through the sky towards the pair of ribbons. They hadn't moved yet, which was good. I solidified a platform of Ryatsu under my feet and kicked off of it, straight at the building they were inside. A boom signified my breaking the sound barrier, and I slammed through the roof and upper wall of the domicile. Controlled burst of Ryatsu, and the air was cleared. They all were in front of me, Rukia to the left, Hamura in the center, with her hand out towards Rukia, and Shizuku already rising to his feet on the right, panic on his face. Something guttural came from my throat as Shiro's blade screamed through the air, the lanky man just barely summoning his scythe and positioning himself in front of his sibling. Black Zanpakuto met white spirit weapon, and Shizuku couldn't have hoped to hold his ground. His body collapsed through the wall, but Hamura was able to finish reaching for Rukia and teleport the 2 of them away. I saw red. North-northwest, 500 meters. Shiro called, and I fired myself through the wall. The dark-haired twin appeared in my path, his scythe whipping around. Remembering it could phase through my Zanpakuto and cut directly through my memories, I ducked under the attack, Asen's blade darting forward. The brother, thin, malnourished, reliant on hollow-fied strength, and having only fought against small hollows, could never have been able to dodge out of the way. The blade parsed through his chest, going straight through muscle, bone, and lung without difficulty. His body evaporated in smoke, and I sped through the cloud only to catch more fading wisps. Same jump. My hollow informed, and I was already on top of the location. Shizuku, inexperienced with fighting through intense pain, was much more sloppy in defending his sister the third time. His swing much slower, I leaned to the side of the downward strike and severed from the right side of his neck through his left bicep. Brother! Hamura screamed immediately, tears already prickling at her eyes and distorted Ryatsu beginning to swarm her body. Shiro's blade stabbed through her throat and upper torso. Pushing forward, I pulled her away from Rukia and into the air. The twin's body slid slightly further down my blade, before I whipped my arm around, her corpse flying off and tumbling a few feet across the dirt. Whimpers met my ears, and I looked over to see Rukia trying to crawl back away from me. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her own tears were already streaming down her face. I locked gazes with her, noticing that her body froze when I did. There was no recognition in her gaze, so I huffed to try to vent out some of my aggression and drifted my gaze away while flicking the BLD off my Zanpakuto. You'll understand in a few seconds, I'm sure. I remember now that it didn't take long for the effects of their power to go away. Understand what? Her voice trembled, panic sparking off each word. That you just killed a pair of children that didn't know better. My body straightened, and I shifted back to look at the adopted Kachiki. Her face hadn't changed. The full story will come back to you. I remembered as soon as you killed Shizuku. She cut off. There was a fury in her tone that was never in any of our play fights. They were scared, trusted no one outside of myself, had been betrayed and hurt by almost everyone. You're the time traveler, are you saying you didn't know? Of course I did, so what? They still kidnapped you, they still wiped the memories of your and myself from everyone. Did you listen to a word I said? They were terrified that Shinigami weren't to be trusted and would kill them again, and look what you did. You crashed into their home with your Zanpakuto out looking for BLD and hunted them down when they tried to run away. They should have been scared of Shinigami hunting them down, look what they did. All they wanted was to have names to call their own and someone they could trust. Are you trying to pin the blame on a pair of scared children? We're preparing for a war, they should have acted smarter. I defaulted. What's wrong with you? She finally screamed as she stood. But she didn't get closer. They were children that scavenged in Hueco Mundo for survival. They knew nothing other than being helped by me and being killed by a Shinigami. They couldn't possibly know the Godiai is preparing for war, and moreover, they shouldn't have to work around that. They should have been cared for properly, given a chance to understand and grow. You knew what they went through. You knew what they wanted and needed. You had everything you needed to talk them down and correct their path. But instead you only validated their fears and slaughtered them. And for what? What made you decide they were irredeemable and absolutely had to be murdered? I stomped my foot in her direction, hunching my shoulders and my face curling into a snarl as I prepared to scream back, only to find I could come up with nothing. Nothing she could understand, at least. I spat at the ground. You wouldn't understand. I growled. Her hands clenched at her sides, and with her body shaking, she narrowed her still crying eyes. Tell me. Rukia breathed. I said dash. And I said tell me. She shouted. You won't dash. Stop putting this off. She cut off once more. My teeth grinded against each other. They made Yoruchi and Unohana forget me. Erupted from my throat. Her eyes widened for just a moment before they hardened. That's it. Rage burned inside my chest. That's it. The sound came from a deep part of my throat. You murdered a pair of scared, innocent children over something you already knew was reversible. When I woke up this morning, I had forgotten everything since I had time traveled. I opened my eyes after having watched the loves of my life die in front of me years prior, and they had no idea who I was. Yoruchi was ready to attack me. I defended. The petite Shinigami took a breath, before speaking quietly. That does sound like something horrible, that I couldn't understand the feeling of. She agreed. But does that justify killing innocent children? You don't dash. Stop avoiding the question. She stepped forward and slapped me across the face. Does that justify killing innocent children? I stood, my face barely having moved from her strike. My eyes were wide, shocked by her slap. We smacked each other around, but there was always an aura of playfulness, or of knocking sense into the other, when doing so. Her slap had been filled with nothing but hurt. There was fear. She was scared of me. She didn't fail to recognize me because she had forgotten who I was. She failed to recognize me because I wasn't who she remembered I was. I was angry. I breathed. Does that justify it? She breathed, breathing heavy from all the shouting. I wasn't thinking clearly. Does that justify it? She challenged. I woke up, and it was right after the wars again, and dash. Does that justify it? All I could think about was dash. Justify it. I can't. I screamed back. My arms trembled as everything went silent save for the echoes of my voice. My breath came shakily, my lungs shuddering with each inhale and exhale. My fists tightened until they hurt, until I was sure to have cracked my own bones, until my body forced myself to snap my hands open and drop my swords. I crumbled to my knees, my gaze falling to the ground as I tried to get a hold of my breathing. I opened my mouth, to say something, only for everything I could say to feel wrong. No matter how much remorse I felt, apologizing meant nothing. What did promising to do better mean when I had already been getting better? Saying it was a mistake just felt like trying to shift the blame. Claiming I wasn't thinking clearly was an excuse. Saying I felt bad about it was just childish, begging for pity. I had killed 2 children, who didn't know any better, who deserved to have something good, only for me to rip it all to pieces. So I shut my mouth. A group of Shinigami joined the 2 of us. Yoruchi, Unohana, Kairaku, Urahara. Presumably, the 4 of them were able to recognize the tension in the air, as none of them spoke. They each just roamed around a little, silently investigating. Kisuke crouched down by Shizuku, looking over the boy's scythe. Kuchiki-san, Kairaku tipped his hat, would you mind informing us what occurred here? I felt Rukia's eyes fall upon me, just staring for a long moment. The 2 bodies are a pair of twins that wanted to hide away with me. They were afraid of Shinigami, and so used their powers to remove me from everyone's memories so that no one would come looking for me. She released a heavy breath. Ichigo attempted to talk them down, but they wouldn't listen, so he was forced to kill them. My own breath hitched. The 2 captains and 2 ex-captains were silent once more, taking in her words. It's appreciated that you're willing to cover for him, Yoruchi announced. But I know Ichigo was in no state where peaceful negotiation was a thought in his mind when he left the living world. And I can certainly confirm he hadn't calmed down by the time he got here. The flowery captain colluded. I've been informed already that there were 2 unseated Shinigami casualties in this area. Unohana's frown was in her voice. I know he's been given an official position as part of the Gotei 13. Rukia's voice was soft. Is he going to be punished for this? I didn't have to look to know Unohana and Kairaku glanced at each other in silent conversation. I don't believe we need to. The captain of the 8th explained. He's punishing himself enough as it is. As far as the official report is concerned, he did exactly as he said he was going to when he entered the Siriidii through a Garganta. The Shinigami casualties were from them antagonizing the wrong person, the culprits were dealt with, and the disturbance they caused has been resolved. No. I mumbled. I felt everyone's eyes snap to me, but before they could protest, I continued. The first person the twins targeted to test if they had sufficient control over their abilities was Kuratsuchi, who upon seeing he was in a horrifyingly unfamiliar environment as his personal laboratory, destroyed everything in sight. The destruction caused that monster to appear, it only temporarily stopped due to having just formed and lacking energy. It's liable to wake up sometime today and cause more havoc if someone doesn't destroy it. I sensed the collective blink from everyone around me. Oh. The second eldest present captain voiced. After pounding my fist on the door, I didn't have to wait for a response all that long, one of the servants opening it after just a few seconds. Kurosaki-sama. The servant recognized immediately. You came at a wonderful time, both Tsuneyashiro-sama and his wife are present. Good. I grunted. They stepped aside, letting me in, before closing the door behind me and leading me towards where the clan head was. I was escorted to a study, where the servant knocked for me and informed Don whatever that I was here. As the servant left, I heard some panicked shuffling inside before the green-haired man slid the door open. He was dressed as fancily as always, his hair neatly done, and all in all not looking like I had caught him in the middle of something. Then I peered past him curiously and was able to clearly pick out that some stuff had been thrown to the side in favor of some historical documents that I was able to quickly recognize as old MIA reports. Ah, Aizen stuff, probably. Kuro Ichigo-san. The man stumbled. I'm so happy you visited today. I, unfortunately, was recovering a lost artifact the last time you came, so we could not go over matters withouting the years of manipulation by Sosuke Aizen's hands in Soul Society's history. You seem really enthusiastic about that. I grunted, not in the mood to put up a front for the noble. Well, of course. You mentioned that Aizen had been manipulating things in his favor for over 100 years. To muddy Soul Society's history so, it's atrocious. Hence why it is my duty to clean it of his influence, to point out and show to the public my efforts. Anyone would be overjoyed to know of such a success, why, they'd be all the more eager to have me do even more, possibly request me to do the same for their families. That set off like 9 different sets of warning bells in my head. Asen offered a suggestion for how to respond. What, like a commission? The noble's eyes glistened with a certain light I knew all too well. Well, if they happen to offer rewards to me for something I am duty-bound to achieve, it would only be rude to refuse them, would it not? He smiled. I nodded in understanding. Yeah, now everything made sense. There was a unanimous feeling of unsurprise within me. Donyoku didn't give a DMN about correcting the history of the Soul Society. He just wanted to have a claim to fame so that people would pay him to do stuff. Rich prick wanted to be richer prick. Being a noble meant you were loaded, but it didn't necessarily mean you had an income, just that you innately had enough money to never care. That didn't tell me what the wife's deal was, though. She definitely didn't care about money, since she had been hitting on me before I was hired by the Godii. The servant had said both of them were in, so I figured now was a good time to talk to her. I mindlessly followed Donyoku into his study, Asen listening to the noble's words and reacting appropriately. The green-haired man was waving the MIA reports around, which I caught were the Vizard's MIA reports. Idea. You know, I interrupted whatever unimportant money scheme nonsense he had been in the middle of. I got Yama to sign off on repealing all of their bans. Last I heard, Shinji, Rose, and Kensei were scheduled for captaincy interviews sometime this week to get their positions back. You could probably get on their good sides and have them spread the word about what you're doing. I shamelessly threw them under the bus. The clan head's eyes widened with glee. You said sometime this week? You don't have any specifics beyond that? Nah. And, obviously, they have first-hand accounts of what really went down, so you'd be able to get the best possible reports. People would be climbing over each other to request you, knowing you were able to be so thorough with your information gathering. A bag was in his hands immediately. I hope you can forgive me, to willfully miss such an opportunity would be the greatest insult to the Tsunoyashiro noble family and our duty to preserve Seoul society's history. For the sake of our pride, I must see if I can acquire the assistance of those wronged by Sosuke Aizen's hand. I waved it off like I cared in the first place. Totally understand. Hell, I'll do you a solid and stick around for a little bit. He was like a child on Christmas morning. Your efforts to assist me are greatly appreciated, Ichigo-san. He called as he near ran out the door. I tracked his Ryatsu until it was out the building, then I left the room. With notably more control this time, I sent out a pulse of pesquisa, pinging the wife's location. She was by herself, and figuring there was very little I could do wrong with how aggressively she had been hitting on me, I wasted no time in sauntering to where she was. It was a mildly annoying reminder how obnoxiously huge the homes of the four great noble clans were, that it took a few minutes to reach the room she was in, which I realized was a bedroom. I knocked and shoved my hands in my pockets. Yes. There was the slightest hint of suppressed annoyance in her voice. It's Ichigo. I called. Oh, just a moment. I heard some faint noises, so I focused my hollow hearing, and distinctly caught the shifting of clothes. My Ryatsu sense tracked her moving to the side of the room quickly, and I heard some running water. Once all the preparations were done, she came up to the door and pulled it wide open. I apologize for my state of dress, I was just getting ready for a bath. She projected a sheepish aura, with a nervous smile I knew she didn't actually feel. Her hair was undone, thrown over her left shoulder. Kyoai, I forgot the rest of her name, was clad in only a silken robe, that was loosely done and exposing a lot more skin than was proper for a noble. The right shoulder had fallen to her bicep, leaving it and a very generous amount of her right BRST exposed. It was, of course, purely on accident that I was able to see the faintest edge of dark pink with the way her robe fell. The left side was also hanging open quite a bit, exposing a lot of cleavage and stomach. Below the belt that was intentionally a light breeze away from being undone, she stood in such a way that I saw a dangerous amount of inner thigh, to the point that I wasn't entirely certain I wasn't seeing glimpses of something else. What do I owe the pleasure? God, I so deeply wanted to punch her in the jaw. I had been doing some business with Donyoku, but he found out that some of the captains from 100 years ago were coming back to return to their old positions, and I could feel the bile rising in the back of my throat at the words I was about to say, left me a bit unsatisfied. A predatory gleam appeared in the noble's eyes. Yes, he has a bit of a habit of that, you would find. That better not be the reason she was coming on to me so much. He's so much more focused on ancient relics. The woman shifted on her feet, her robe swaying and flashing her left NPL, when he should be focused on polished and high quality. Not that I disagree with that mindset, I absolutely FNG did. I've yet to find anything that tops Shakespeare's writing, but I can't help but notice that you two don't seem to be a match for each other. She very clearly took that as though I was suggesting she and I would be a better match, by her salacious smile. Shiro and I wanted to shove our foot into her stomach at full force. Asen was ensuring we did not act on that longing. I'll admit, when he and I first met, he seemed to be everything I was looking for. I pointedly noticed that she didn't elaborate on what she had been looking for. But after we got married, I realized I may have misinterpreted what our relationship would be. Green orbs sensually trailed over me. The right side of her robe finally failed in its task, slipping down and fully exposing her right BRST, as the entire right side sagged down in every way where it would be impossible to not notice it had fallen. She acted as though she was not aware of the change to her state of dress. Since then, however, new opportunities have presented themselves. Ones that are much more appealing. She slid her right foot forward, each of her hands holding the frame of the doorway, presenting her body and getting her slowly getting looser robe to flaunt even more. The belt to her robe was doing an atrocious job of keeping the cloth shut, the coat open entirely and exposing absolutely everything. And what makes them so appealing? Asen was the only reason I wasn't physically either attacking or recoiling, my body remaining determinedly still as the noble took initiative to reach forward and brush the fingers of her right hand along the skin of the top of my chest. Well, for one, don't let him fool you, that man puts on more makeup than I do to look as young as he does, and he has the body to match. She sassed. He also spends all of his time either in his study or searching for artifacts, neglecting everything else. That all sounded suspiciously normal, until. He's practically a noble in name only, rejecting invitations to dinners and dances, not bothering to use his power to barter with merchants or his money to buy things befitting the status of the head of one of the 4 great noble clans. But I can tell you aren't as foolish as he is, nor as meek. You're someone who can really take charge, she breathed the last 2 words as her hand came around to my bicep, who gets what he wants, who can announce his presence without saying a word. Is this Bleach really? You're someone who's strong, who has a presence, whose name carries weight. She leaned in to inhale my scent, shuddering as though she could smell the kind of person I was. Asen let go, and I grabbed her by her sides then lifted her up. Her lips curled into something wide and excited, multiple types of thrill entering her system right before I threw her into the room. Her body dented the far wall, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping in pain. You're a shameless, vain, status-seeking skank. I realized. You married into the Tsuneyashiros because you thought you would be treated like a goddamn princess, then such tracks to going after me because you realized everyone was talking about me. I'm going to have you thrown into the Mukin. She shrieked, immediately realizing there was no way she was going to talk her way back into my good graces. Good Fenji luck with that, Bleach. I've got more authority than Yamamoto in the right circumstances, and I ain't one of the trained dogs that plays dead when Central 46 threatens me. I got nothing to be afraid of from old geezers that can't do anything but yell at me from behind a desk. Your age is showing, you brat. Walk out that door, and I'll make your life a living hell. She hissed. I barked out a laugh and stomped away. I shuffled forward, my hands anxiously tucked into my pockets as I journeyed towards the Bankai training grounds, as I had decided to dub it. Rukia was waiting for me inside. At least, I assumed she was, because I hadn't checked with my Ryatsu sense. It had been a week since the event with the twins, and we hadn't talked since. I had gone to the Siriidii twice in that week, even visited the 13th Division grounds, and couldn't find her. There was no mistaking why. In the end, I just told Yhwach of when and where Rukia's training was going to be, so he could forward the message. At the moment, Shiro was with Chad in Hueco Mundo, and Asen with Yuryu in the living world. It was having a definite drain on my Ryatsu, but nothing I couldn't handle. In the end, all that it meant to me was that I didn't have them in my head to comfort me through whatever was about to happen. There was no way it wasn't going to hurt. When I entered the training grounds, I did find that Rukia had clearly gotten the message, as she was standing with her arms crossed over her chest uncomfortably. I also found Renji sitting on a rock a couple feet away from her, pointedly looking away from me. My eyes widened, neither in shock nor confusion, but a different emotion entirely. No, I wasn't expecting Renji to be here at all, but the instant I saw him, I knew why. I forgot how to breathe for a long moment, as my mouth dropped open slightly. Frozen, I could barely move my eyes, but it was enough that I could look between the two of them. They displayed that they were able to feel my gaze, slightly turning even further away. I don't know if it hurt more that I knew why Rukia needed Renji here, or that I completely understood why she felt that way. My face slowly drooped down, my shoulders falling with it, my breath slipping out from between my lips. I didn't step closer. Thanks for making it here. I tried to find some balance of volume to keep from startling her, but I saw her shoulders flinch anyway. I didn't let my reaction to that show. For your training, the end goal is your Bankai. I've seen it, it's pretty strong. But, for now, we'll be dash. That's it? Rukia's voice cracked, not daring to look in my direction. Sensing she wasn't done, I bit my lip to keep my mouth shut. Your dash, she paused for a moment. You're just straight back into training. Did you even? Was it just more, saving the world to, do that? You're not even going to try apologizing. I gulped at her words, soft and cautious. Afraid of the reaction. Heavy silence filled the room as I put together a response. Would it not be hollow, to apologize? Inside of my pockets, my fingers picked at the threads. Insulting? Saying sorry it's to say that you're going to do better. I've been getting better, since I came here, and then I did that. I came up with every excuse I could latch onto, but none of them changed the fact that I killed 2 people that deserved to be talked down. My eyes tracked her head tilting down slightly, as her shoulders hiked up. That's not what you said last week. I wasn't in my right mind when I did that. I explained. But, you said it yourself, it doesn't justify what I did. It doesn't make it okay, it doesn't undo what happened, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen again. It's an excuse, and a bad one. I lose my sheet, kill more innocents, and everyone is supposed to be okay with that because my head's all effed up. It's alright that people who have no idea what's going on lose their lives because I wasn't thinking straight and ripped them in half. No. I'm the only one who knows how bad I am, I have to be the one to keep myself in check, and I didn't do that. Once I finished speaking, the air returned to being dense. Full in a way that grated on me, made me want to lean over and empty my stomach. I wanted to pace around, bounce my leg and hit something, but I couldn't. I shoved my arms down as far as they could go, driving my hands deeper into my pockets until I could feel the fabric pulling apart. I knew them too well for them to hide from me. It was as clear as day that they were both frightened. I wanted to scream so loudly that they had nothing to fear from me, but I could only scream at myself louder that they had every right to be nervous. Every muscle in my body wanted to move, to vent out my own anxieties, my goddamn fear, but every fiber of my brain knew it would only make the situation worse. Your voice is the same as his. Rukia began, a near whisper. Your hair, your nearsighted idiocy, your reckless drive to protect, they're all the same. Hesitantly, violet eyes crept around to meet mine. But, you're not Ichigo. The inside of my mouth dried. All of the anxious energy that had been throbbing inside of me dissipated. My eyes burned, and I did what I could to blink it away. No. I smiled sadly. I've been trying to tell you that. I just wish it hadn't had to come to this for it to click. Who are you, then? Renji spoke up for the first time. My mouth opened to speak, only for me to realize I didn't know the right way to answer that. I'm someone who. I shook my head, before restarting. When I look at someone I know, the first thing I see is their body. For a second, I'm right back in the moment when they died. My gaze drifted up to lock eyes with the redhead. I see your Shihakusho burning away in my hand, when I failed to pull you out of a Quincy trap. Then Rukia. I see you, zombified by one of the Stern Ritter, being thrown at me, again and again, until either I die, or you do. My eyes then return to the dirt beneath my feet. I see Byakuya, shredded by his own stolen Bankai. I see Yoruchi, poisoned to death by her own BLD. I see Unohana, impaled by a Quincy spear. I see myself not being able to get there in time, not strong enough to deal with the enemy, not able to do the only thing I've ever wanted to do. Have that happen enough times, and you start to stop caring about what you have to do to keep what you have left safe. You stop thinking about where the road you're on is taking you, and just focus on keeping as many people as you can alive. I couldn't help but pause for a moment, as my own ramblings made sense to myself. My gaze lifted back up, finding the two of them staring at me open-mouthed. I'm someone who reached the end of the road, and trying to find my way back. Violet and Brown watched me carefully, analyzing me in a new light. Do you regret any of the things you've done? Rukia had to ask. I focused on her, my expression not changing from that same sad smile. I've been through 2 wars, Rukia. I reminded gently. Do you really think I don't? She had the awareness to slightly regret asking that question. I think we're starting to understand, now, that we're no longer trying to pretend you're the same 15-year-old brat who has no idea how anything works. Just, don't go thinking everything is going to go back to normal because of that. Renji stated. I wasn't able to stop the depreciating laugh that shook my chest. If everything went back to normal because someone realized things were wrong, I wouldn't be having the problems that I am. Both of them were able to flinch at that, as they realized just who they said that to. I figure you two are gonna want some time to let this settle in your heads, so how about we get started on the training so I can give you some distance. The lieutenant and third seat that I had to keep reminding myself wasn't a lieutenant nodded wordlessly. Okay, so, I was saying earlier that we're not going to work on your Benkai yet. We're going to work on your Shirkai first, because you're not using it right. Rukia stared at me, utterly dumbfounded by what she just heard. I'm not using my Shirkai right. The idea was clearly completely incomprehensible to her. I really don't want to knock you down or anything, but you fundamentally misunderstand your Zanpakuto. I winced. She worked her jaw as she attempted to come up with a response, but whether she even believed my words or not, she was at a blatant loss. Your Zanpakuto isn't an ice type. I decided to explain for her. But that doesn't, how could, I don't under. Beside her, Renji was equally as baffled as his childhood friend, looking down in thought as his brain worked to reason what Rukia's Zanpakuto was if it wasn't an ice type. Your Zanpakuto is a cold type. I clarified. The tattooed man's head immediately shot up. What's the difference? What even is a cold type Zanpakuto? Sodi no Shirayuki is a Zanpakuto whose ability is to reduce the temperature of things within its range. Ice and snow is more of a side effect. I couldn't help but smile sheepishly as my hand came up to rub at the back of my head. Rukia was not going to like this next part. Your body growing colder the more you use your Shirkai isn't something to manage, it's what your Shirkai is supposed to do. Yup, as soon as I finished speaking, she numbly let herself collapse onto her butt, her legs flopping in front of her. In general, Sodi no Shirayuki reduces your own body's temperature to such a point that you freeze anything that you come into contact with. Its dances and even the blade itself are intended to be a means to extend your reach. Just as numbly, she let herself fall back, now spread eagle on the ground, staring blankly at the ceiling of the cavern. I leaned in slightly, with mild concern and curiosity. Renji did the same. Rukia? He asked gently. Are you gonna be okay? There was a deep resignation in her tone. She did not shift in her position. I'm just gonna. The two of us nodded understandingly and slightly shifted away to give her more space. While we did that, she brought her hands up to cover her face, inhaled deeply, and screamed with all her might. It lasted several seconds. I was actually impressed. Once it was done, I cautiously stepped closer to her, until I was nearly standing between her and Renji. I leaned over slightly to look down at her, even though she displayed exactly no longing to remove her hands from her face. You want to beat on me a little bit while you practice with your Shirkai? I offered softly. She didn't respond for a long moment. I almost began to wonder if she heard me before she wordlessly nodded her head with her hand still covering her. Okay. My fingers tapped on my desk restlessly. Below, my foot bounced in much the same manner. I glared at the camera sitting on a small tripod in front of me, the lens reflecting my bedroom light like it was glaring back at me. Yoruchi was lying on my bed, watching anime once more. She really liked that hero school anime. She had once pointed out some white rat in a suit and told me he reminded her of Kisuke. Unohana was currently downstairs with Dad, learning about modern medicine. And in the meantime, I was trying and failing badly to record that podcast Shuhei wanted me to do. I had been on the fence about it since he had first brought up the idea, with Unohana encouraging me to do it and Yoruchi just wanting me to go with whatever option I was most comfortable with. It was seeing Rukia so afraid of me that she needed Renji's company which made my decision. The idea of Rukia not being comfortable being alone with me disturbed me on an unfathomable level. This was the woman who was the reason I had first awakened my Shinigami powers. She redefined my life and was one of the fundamental cores of how I became who I was now, excluding all the trauma. The only one of my friends who had truly been there longer than she was Chad. Always at my side, not the unflinching wall covering my back like Chad, but there to assist every time I needed an extra hand or a good slap in the face. That she couldn't be alone with me spoke volumes for what the rest of the Soul Society must have felt towards me. The Tsunyashiros probably wanted my head now. No doubt the rumor mill had been working overtime about all the Shinigami I've killed since my time travel. The gigantic section of the Siriidii I blew apart during the Kusaka incident was probably the first thing unseated Shinigami pointed to when talking about me. The Godii couldn't function at its best if it was terrified of the guy leading the charge. And it was just unreasonable to even talk to enough seated Shinigami to spread the word that I was a decent guy. Which meant using the camera Shuhei had all but forced into my hands was the best bet. Only, of course, I had no FNG clue how to do this right. Growling, I stood up, stomped away from my desk, and flopped onto Yoruchi, draping my body over hers and hanging my head over her right shoulder. She hummed happily, and brought up her right hand to idly caress my face. She spread her legs a little so that they were outside mine, and brought up her ankles to hook them around my thighs. Of all things, I didn't think it would be a camcorder that would end up beating you. The princess purred as she nuzzled the side of my head. How the F do I start this thing? I groaned into her shoulder. Depends on how far back you want to go. The whole point is to connect better with the Siriidii, but it's not like they need to hear every detail of your backstory. What, so do I start with Rukia appearing in my room and me literally kicking her in the butt? Do I explain that I'm such a living, breathing, F.U. to logic that I broke a Bakudo spell as a human through sheer force of will? Do I talk about being strong enough to more or less go toe-to-toe with a Minos Grande before I even went to the Soul Society for the first time? I complained. The main purpose is to better connect with the Godii, but it's strong for them to connect with someone when you hear that their entire life is actually manufactured bullshit. There's not a single part of my life that I can describe that isn't shoving down their throats that I'm a borderline impossible anomaly whose definition of normal is a world-ending threat every other week. It's like being expected to connect to Sakata FNG Kentoki. You could talk about your relationships. She offered. Talk about how you bicker with Rukia, or get into contests with Yuryu, or go drinking with Ranjaku and I. Again, Rukia is a third seat, Yuryu is a quincy, and you and Ranjaku are a noble ex-captain and lieutenant respectively. The only person I talk to on the regular that isn't in the upper echelons of power is Hanataro. Hanataro works, doesn't he? Hanataro is a fourth seat. I reminded. She lightly patted my cheek. He's a seventh seat, Barry-kun. He's still seated. He is still seated. She acknowledged. But he's meek, and a good in for people to realize you're not the child-eating monster everyone thinks you are. I don't think him by himself would be enough to get them to get past all of the absurdity that makes up my life. Probably not. The work cat accepted. She tilted her head to the left. You could lean on the insanity. What? I nuzzled into the space between her neck and collarbone. Don't be all flat-faced about it. Have some fun, highlight the fact that the situations you get into are crazy. Don't go. I was strong enough to fight a Minos before I even realized the Godii 13 was a thing. Go. This nutjob Quincy challenged me to a hollow slaying contest, and somewhere amidst the chaos I looked up and saw a goddamn Minos. I blinked, tossing the idea around in my head. That could work. I mumbled into her skin. That could work really well. Less, follow me as I become strong enough to kill the Soul King. More, all I want to do is graduate high school and people keep trying to kill me. Exactly. I felt her cheek curl in as she grinned. My arms moved from limply being draped over her to circling around to hold her loosely. I think we've pretty thoroughly established that I should never be given the freedom to name things, so what do you propose we call this? Well, the exciting adventures of the god of SEC, Ichigo, obviously. She smirked. Stop. I groaned. Fine, fine. She giggled. Don't want to go too anime with it, they're not supposed to. Treat it as a joke. But we also want something that really gives off an Ichigo vibe. Maybe the afterlife is bullshit. That's bound to get people's curiosity. I love you. I hummed. Her laugh was appealing. You're welcome. I shifted my arms again, ready to push myself up off the bed. The chocolate-skinned goddess pat my cheek once more before lowering her hand. With a grunt, I got up off the bed and sat back down in my seat, bringing my left hand up to hover my finger over the button once more. A deep breath in, hold for 3 seconds, and out. Then, click. My hand fell back into my lap, and I blinked at the reflective lens. I didn't think of, an intro for this. Unless you did it in your head, nope. Yoruchi called. Screw it, it's already recording. Hi, Soul Society, I guess. My eyebrows furrowed. I don't know how to talk to a camera, so deal with it, whoever ends up watching this. Thanks Shuhei dash. Hisejai Fukateko. She interrupted once more. Remember that most people use titles. Well, I don't, so if we want to do this right, I ain't gonna be calling him Hisejai Fukatecho. The snark was immediate. So, yeah, thanks Shuhei for asking me to do something like this. I can confidently say there would be too much to go over for me to go through everything in one sitting, so this is episode 1, I guess. Of The Afterlife is Bullshit. It's basically my life story. I paused for a moment, taking a second to get my thoughts together. The reason I'm doing this is because I recently realized how much of a divide there is between me and all of my old friends. My voice had turned somber. I had known, in a sense, that I wouldn't be able to have the same relationships I had originally, but it didn't click until a couple days ago to what extent. It's been said to me a few times, and it didn't hit me until recently, that I know a lot of people better than they may ever know me, now. I'm not naive enough to believe this will get those relationships back, but I'm hoping I can mend all the bridges I've inadvertently burned. With that in mind, I guess the best way to start this off is the first time I ever met a Shinigami. That is, when I kicked Rukia Kuchiki in the butt. I grinned. It didn't matter how rocky our relationship got. I would never pass up an opportunity to tell people about that.